Hey guys, tonight we are going to travel back in time, not to a grand battlefield or a royal court, but to the muddy, paved streets of the American Wild West. We're peeling back the romantic veneer of the Hollywood Western, past the heroic cowboys and the swashbuckling gunfights, to find a story that's rarely told with honesty. We're going to walk in the shoes of the women known as soiled doves or sporting women, and experience what their lives were really like. It's a far cry from the sassy, golden-hearted saloon girl myth. Frankly, if you were dropped into this reality, you might not last the first day. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And in the comments, I'd love to know what city you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see where these stories travel. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air in the textile mill is thick with the smell of machine oil, sweat, and damp wool. It's a smell you know so well it no longer registers, much like the constant, deafening clatter of the looms that shakes the floorboards and vibrates deep in your bones. Your day started before sunrise and will end long after sunset, all for a wage that barely covers the rent for your tiny room in a crowded tenement. Your fingers are raw, your back aches, and your future looks like an endless spool of grey thread, leading nowhere. This is your world, a world of factory whistles, coughing neighbors, and the pervasive damp chill of an East Coast city. Hope is a luxury you can't afford. Then one day, on your weary walk home, you'll see it, tacked to a wooden post, already peeling at the corners from a recent downpour, is a splash of color against the grimy backdrop of the street. It's a poster. You stop. Other people jostle past you, wrapped in their own misery, but your eyes are fixed on the bold, optimistic lettering, or PPORTUNITYINTHEGOLD and WST. It screams INTRPRISINGYOUNGWOMENWANTED. Below the headline is a crude but evocative drawing of a bustling town, with wide streets, handsome buildings, and what looks like sunshine, actual sunshine. The text promises respectable work, good wages, and a chance to be part of building a new world. The positions are listed in wonderfully vague terms: dance hall hostesses, entertainers, wait staff for high-class saloons. This is a common sight in the 1870s and 80s. The West is booming, and the gender imbalance is extreme. Men miners, ranchers, railroad workers, soldiers vastly outnumber women, and the demand for female companionship, in any form, is insatiable. The poster doesn't lie. Not technically. There is opportunity, and they do want young women. But the word respectable is doing some very heavy lifting. You read the words dance hall hostess and you picture something, well, respectable. You imagine serving drinks, sharing a polite dance with a lonely miner, and earning enough to maybe one day open a small shop of your own. Here's a little tidbit: you wouldn't know many of these posters were placed by employment agencies that were, in reality, direct recruiting arms for madams and broth aloners hundreds of miles away. Sometimes they do even pay for your train ticket west. A seemingly generous offer that was actually the first link in a chain of debt you might never break. The language was a carefully constructed web of euphemisms: sporting women, ladies of the evening, soiled doves. These were the polite terms society used to avoid the blunt reality of the profession they were recruiting you for. You stand there, the cold seeping through the thin soles of your shoes, and a debate rages within you. It sounds too good to be true. A part of you, the cynical, tired part, knows there's a catch. But another part of you, the part that still remembers how to dream, clings to the image of that sun-drenched street. What is the alternative to stay here and slowly fade away in the noise and the filth to marry a man, just as poor and tired as you are underage children into the same life of drudgery? Historians to this day debate the fine line between choice and coercion for women in your position. It's easy to say you were simply tricked, a naive victim of a cruel system. And for many, that was the absolute truth. But for others, the story is more complex. Did some women read between the lines? Did they understand the unspoken offer in the term entertainer and make a calculated, desperate gamble? Was this a conscious decision, weighing the near-certain misery of their current life against the high-risk, high-reward possibility of another? The historical record is filled with personal letters and diaries that suggest boths in areas were common. It wasn't always a clear case of deception, but often a grim economic choice made from a list of terrible options. The wind picks up, threatening to tear the poster from its post. Your decision is made in an instant. With numb fingers, you tear off the small slip at the bottom with the address of the recruitment office. You fold the small, down piece of paper and tuck it deep into your pocket. It feels both as heavy as an anchor and as light as a feather. You don't know it yet, but you've just purchased a one-way ticket to a life you can't possibly imagine. Your journey west has begun. The train station is a cathedral of steam and noise. Porters shout, wheels screech on the tracks, and 100 different conversations in a dozen languages merge into an overwhelming roar. The air is heavy with the smell of coal, smoke, and hot metal. You clutch your small, worn carpet bag with one hand in the crumpled, precious train ticket in the other. This is it, the point of no return. The agent who processed your application, a man with a slicked back hair and a smile that never reached his eyes, hastily pointed you towards the correct platform before vanishing back into the city's grime. You are on your own. Finding your car feels like navigating a battlefield. You're pushed and jostled by burly men with calloused hands, families with crying children, and a few other young women who, like you, have a look of fierce, fragile hope in their eyes. You exchange fleeting, silent glances. Are they also going to be hostesses? You don't dare ask. You finally heave yourself and your bag up the steep iron steps into the designated car. The term passenger car feels like a wild exaggeration. It's more like a long wooden box on wheels. Hood, unforgiving benches on the walls, with no upholstery to soften the ride. There's a single, pot-bellied stove at one end that will be a furnace in the daytime and offer pitifully little warmth at night. This, you learn, is the immigrant class, the cheapest way to cross the continent. The train lurches forward with a violent jerk that throws you onto the bench, and so it begins. The first few hours are a blur of brick buildings and sooty skies, the familiar landscape of the life you're leaving behind. But soon, the city gives way to countryside, which in turn melts into a seemingly endless expanse of rolling hills and farmland, mile by rattling mile. The world you knew is being erased. Days and nights blow into one long, monotonous rhythm, punctuated by the relentless clatter of the wheels. Dod-dum, dod-dum, dod-dum. It's a sound that gets into your blood, a constant reminder that you are moving, hurtling towards an unknown fate. You sleep fitfully, your head propped against the vibrating wall or slumped against the shoulder of a sleeping stranger. The air in the car becomes stale and thick, a cocktail of unwashed bodies, cheap tobacco, and the lingering smell of whatever food people manage to bring with them. Here's a small detail of travel: the posters conveniently left out. There are no dining cars for people like you. Sustenance is your own responsibility. At sporadic stops in tiny, makeshift towns, vendors rush the train, hawking suspicious-looking sausages, hard biscuits, and murky coffee. You spend your few remaining coins carefully, making a single stale loaf of bread last for 2 days. You watch wealthier passengers in the cars ahead of you, glimpsing white tablecloths and uniformed waiters through their clean windows. They are traveling to the west. You are simply being transported. You spend hours staring out the window. The landscape slowly transforms. The lush green of the east flattens into a vast, empty ocean of prairie grass that stretches to the horizon in every direction. The sky is immense, bigger than any sky you have ever seen, and it makes you feel terrifyingly small and insignificant. Sometimes you see herds of buffalo, a dark, moving river in the distance, and for a moment, The sheer wildness of it all rekindles the spark of adventure. But mostly, there is just the grass, the sky, and the endless, rhythmic clatter of the wheels. You see the other women. Some are traveling with families, their purpose clear. But there are you, like you, who are alone. There's one in particular you notice. A girl who can't be much older than 16, with red-rimmed eyes and a shawl pulled tightly around her shoulders. She's being escorted by a severe-looking older woman who watches her every move. The girl never speaks, never smiles. It's here that historians still debate the nature of these journeys for women recruited into the entertainment industry. For a woman like you, traveling independently, there's a fragile illusion of freedom. But for that girl with the chaperone, was that woman a protector, ensuring her safe arrival for a legitimate job, or was she a warden, ensuring valuable property didn't have second thoughts and tried to slip away at one of the stops? The line between guardian and guard was often intentionally blurred. And for many women, the journey west was not one of liberation, but of a slow, dawning realization that their cage had simply gotten much, much larger. Days turn into a week, then more. You've lost track of time. Your body is a map of aches and bruises from the hard bench. Your clothes are stiff with grime. Your dreams of a golden future are now tempered by a gritty, weary realism. You just want the journey to end. Then, the landscape changes again. The grass becomes sparser. The earth turns a dusty red-brown. You see strange, towering rock formations and jagged mountains in the far distance. The air that drifts through the open window is dry and hot. One afternoon, as the sun hangs low and orange in the sky, the train's whistle blows a long, piercing cry that sounds different this time. It's not a warning for a crossing, it's a signal of arrival. People begin to stir, gathering their meager belongings. You press your face to the grimy glass, your heart pounding a nervous rhythm against your ribs. Out in the hazy distance, a small, chaotic collection of wooden structures begins to take shape against the vast, empty backdrop. This is it. This is the place from a poster. Your new life is about to begin. The train groans to a halt. The sudden silence, almost as jarring as the noise that preceded it. A cloud of steam and dust billows past your window, momentarily obscuring the view. As it clears, you get your first proper look at your destination. The word town feels generous. It's a raw, sprawling camp, thrown together with a haste that speaks of gold fever and frantic opportunism. You step down from the train, your legs unsteady after so long, and your feet sink into an inch of fine, powdery dust that feels like flour. The main street is a wide, chaotic river of mud and dirt, pockmarked with puddles from a recent train. There are no cobblestones, no boardwalks for long stretches, just churned up earth, a constant parade of men on horseback, heavy-laden wagons, and prospectors leading stubborn mules navigates the thoroughfare, creating a chaotic, slow-moving ballet of grit and ambition. The buildings that line this main artery are a motley collection of rough-hewn timber shacks, canvas stunts, and a few more permanent-looking two-story structures with false fronts, designed to make them look grander than they are. Their unpainted wood is already weathered to a silvery grey by the relentless sun and wind. The vibrant, sun-drenched town from the poster has resolved into this dusty, monochrome reality. You take a breath, and the air tastes of dirt, horse manure, and the distant, metallic tang of a blacksmith's forge. You stand by the tracks, touching your bag, feeling utterly lost. No one is here to meet you. The other passengers from the train disperse quickly, swallowed up by the town's raw energy. You check the address you were given, a slip of paper that now seems like a relic from another lifetime. The Gilded Cage Saloon, Main Street. You look up and down the chaotic street. There are at least a dozen saloons, their swinging doors offering glimpses into smoky, noisy interiors. As you start to walk, carefully picking your way around a particularly deep mud puddle, you become acutely aware of the stares. There are men everywhere, men with beards matted with dust, men in dusty soldiers' uniforms, Men whose faces are burned brown by the sun. And they are all looking at you. Their gazes are direct, appraising, and utterly devoid of the polite deference you were used to in the East. Here, a woman walking alone is not just a person, she's a spectacle, a rarity. Their eyes linger on your face, your hands, the simple dress you've tried so hard to keep clean. It makes your skin crawl. You pull your shawl tighter and walk faster, your eyes fixed on the ground ahead. Here's a peculiar social detail of frontier towns the Sunboat Mine. Historians and writers of the era often described an invisible line that divided the town. On one side was the so-called respectable zone, with the general store, the assayer's office, and a handful of houses where families lived. On the other side was the sporting district, with the saloons, gambling dens, and brothels. As a new arrival, you wouldn't know where this line was, but you would learn very quickly. Crossing it, even by accident, could tarnish a decent woman's reputation forever. For you, of course, your destination lies squarely on the wrong side of that line. You finally spot it. The gilded cage is written in faded gold paint on a sign hanging above a set of imposing double doors. It's one of the larger buildings, 2 stories high, with a balcony on the second floor. From inside, you can hear the tinny, out-of-tune clinking of a piano and a burst of raucous male laughter. This is it. You pause for a moment, your heart a frantic bird against your ribs. This is your last chance to turn back, but to where you have no money for a return ticket. And the thought of admitting defeat is almost as terrifying as walking through those doors. The debate among historians about the layout of these entertainment districts is quite fascinating. Some argue that their placement, often clustered together and sometimes separated by a creek or the tracks, was a deliberate act of social quarantine, a way for the respectable part of town to physically wall off the vice it publicly condemned but privately consumed. Others argue it was simply a matter of economics and convenience, creating a competitive marketplace where customers could easily browse the available wares. Either way, the geography of the town was a physical manifestation of its moral hypocrisy. You take a deep, dusty breath and push open one of the swinging doors. The change is instantaneous. You step from the harsh, bright sunlight into a world of perpetual twilight. The air is thick with the sweet, cloying smell of stale beer, cheap whiskey, and dense clouds of cigar smoke that hang in the air like a fog. The piano player, a man in a bowler hat with a bored expression, hammers out a tune without looking at the keys. A few men are playing cards at a round table, their faces grim and focused. Others are bellied up to a long, punished burr, their voices loud and slurred. All activity stops. The piano player's hands hover over the keys. The card players look up from their hands. The men at the bar turn on their stools. Every eye in the room is on you. The newcomer silhouetted against the bright doorway. For a moment, there is complete silence, broken only by the buzzing of a fly. You've just stepped onto the stage, and the audition has begun. The silence in the saloon stretches for a beat too long, thick and heavy with appraisal. Then a voice cuts through the smoky air, sharp and commanding. Don't just stand there blocking the light. Go. Get in or get out. The voice belongs to a woman seated at a small, elevated table in the corner of the room, a position that gives her a clear view of the entire floor. She looks to be in her 40s, but her face carries the kind of weariness that has little to do with age. She is dressed in dark, expensive-looking silk, a stark contrast to the rough-spun clothes of her clientele. Her hair is perfectly coiffed, and a pair of spectacles is perched on her nose. This is the Madame, the owner, the queen of this gilded cage. You quickly step inside, letting the swinging doors slap shut behind you, plunging the room back into its dim, familiar gloom. The men at the bar turn back to their drinks. The card game resumes, and the piano player launches back into his tune. The moment of inspection over, you walk towards her table, your worn bag feeling impossibly heavy, the floorboards creaking under your feet. You introduce yourself, your voice sounding small and thin. You tell her the name of the agency in the East that sent you. She listens without expression, tapping a long finger on the ledger that lies open before her. This book is her Bible and her weapon. So you're the new one, she says, her eyes finally lifting to meet yours. They are shrewd, intelligent, and utterly unsentimental. They scan you from head to toe. A quick, practiced assessment that takes in your worn dress, your tired face, and the desperate hope you're failing to hide. It's not a welcoming look, it's the look of a rancher inspecting new livestock. You've got a bit of traveling dust on you, but I suppose we can clean you up. What can you do? This is the interview. Though it's less a conversation and more an interrogation. You start to list the skills you thought would be valuable. The ones mentioned on the poster. I can serve drinks. I can earn a little. I'm a hard worker. A dry, humorless smile touches her lips. All my girls are hard workers, dear. That's a given. She leans back in her chair. The agent back east tells me you're here to be an entertainer. My hostess. Is that your understanding? You nod idly. Yes, ma'am. Good, she says. Then let's be clear about what that entails. And here, the carefully constructed euphemisms you've been clinging to begin to crumble. She explains the rules of the house. You will work every night, from dusk until the last man leaves, which is oft unclosed at dawn. You will be expected to entertain the customers. This means dancing with them, laughing at their jokes, and encouraging them to buy more drinks. The more they drink, the more money the house makes. A percentage of the drink sales you generate will be credited to you. It sounds simple enough, a commission-based job. But then she continues. Of course, she says, gesturing around the saloon. This is a high-class establishment. You can't work in those rags. She explains that you will be furnished with a new wardrobe, several gowns, stockings, shoes, all of the finest quality. Of course, you'll also be provided with room and board upstairs. Meals are served twice a day, and naturally, you'll have a running tab for laundry, cosmetics, and any personal items you might require. It sounds generous. An advance on your future earnings. What you don't realize is that this is the moment the trap is sprung. There is no written contract. There are no prices listed. It's a verbal agreement, and the terms are entirely in her favor. This is debt peonage. Plain and simple. A system that ensnared countless women in the West. Here's a little-known fact about the business side of these establishments. The madam's primary source of income wasn't always from the services rendered upstairs. It was often from the drinks sold at the bar and, more insidiously, from the exorbitant prices she charged her own girls for their living expenses. A dress that cost her $5 would be put on your tab for $25. A simple meal became a costly expense. Your debt was designed to be inescapable. She then explains the other part of your duties. The part the poster called entertaining and she calls being agreeable. She explains that many of the men will want more than just a dance and a drink. They will want private company upstairs. Police, she tells you, you will be paid a much higher rate. A flat fee per customer. Half for you, half for the house. She says, as if this is a perfectly fair and standard business arrangement. This is the moment of truth, where any lingering illusions you had are brutally stripped away. The blood drains from your face. But, the poster said dance hall hostess. The madam's gaze hardens. Did it well. The poster also didn't mention the mud, the dust, or the fact that the closest thing to a fresh vegetable is a pickled onion in a jar. We all adapt to reality out here. Girl. She leans forward, her voice dropping to a low, confidential tone. Look around. This town is full of men with pockets full of gold dust and months of loneliness behind them. They're not here for polite conversation. You can be a dance hall hostess and make pennies, barely enough to cover your board, and find yourself out on the street in a month. Or you can be a smart girl, an agreeable girl, and you can make more money in a night than you made in a year at that factory. Historians are still untangling the complex power dynamics of the madam-prostitute relationship. Were Adams universally exploitative tyrants, or were some of them shrewd businesswomen who offered a twisted form of protection and opportunity in a world that offered none? The reality is, it was a spectrum. Some madams were notoriously cruel, while others were known to be relatively fair, even maternal figures to their girls. But even the kindest madame was still a businesswoman running a business built on the commodification of the women who worked for her. Her kindness, where it existed, was a tool to ensure a more productive and loyal workforce. She sees the conflict, the horror, and the dawning resignation in your eyes. She doesn't press you. She doesn't need to. She knows she's already won. She picked you up at the end of a long, desperate journey, and she's the only lifeline in sight. Think about it, she says, turning her attention back to her ledger. The dismissal clear. Josie will show you to your room. Get yourself cleaned up. You start tonight. Your interview is over. You've been hired. A young woman detaches herself from the shadows near the bar and walks towards you. This must be Josie. She's probably not much older than you, but her eyes have a weary, knowing look that makes her seem ancient. She's wearing a satin dress that might have been elegant once but is now stained and slightly frayed at the hem. She offers you a small, tired smile. Come on, new girl, I'll show you the ropes. You follow her past the end of the bar to a narrow, steep staircase in the back of the saloon. With each step upward, the boisterous noise from below the piano, the laughter, the clinking glasses begins to fade, replaced by a strange, expectant quiet. The air grows warmer and more confined, smelling faintly of cheap perfume, stale cigar smoke, and something else. A kind of lingering sadness. The hallway at the top of the stairs is long and narrow, lit by a single, smoky oil lamp that casts long, dancing shadows on the walls. The wallpaper is a pattern of dark, faded roses, peeling in several places. A series of identical, numbered doors line both sides of the hall. It feels less like a home and more like a barracks or a prison. Josie stops in front of a door near the far end. This one's yours, she says, pushing it open. It ain't the governor's mansion, but it's better than sleeping in a tent. You step inside, and the first thing that strikes you is the size. The word room is a grand overstatement. It's a cubicle, a stall, barely large enough to contain the few pieces of furniture within it. The walls are thin planks of wood, so thin you can hear the muffled cough of someone in the next room. There's no window. The only light comes from the hallway when the door is open. In the center of the space is a narrow iron bed with a thin, lumpy mattress and a single grey blanket. Next to it is a small, rickety washstand holding a ceramic pitcher and a basin. A few iron hooks on the wall serve as a closet. And that's it. This is your entire world. The madam calls these the cribs, Josie says, leaning against the doorframe. It's where the new girls start. The term crib was common slang for these small, bare bones rooms, a name that infantilized the women who lived in them while also bluntly describing their function. This was not a place for living, it was a place for transactions. You set your small bag down on the floor. It looks pathetic and out of place. Where do I wash, you ask, gesturing to the small basin. Josie lets out a short, dry laugh. That's it. Someone brings a bucket of hot water up in the mornings if you're lucky. Cold water the rest of the time. The privy's out back, past the kitchen. Try not to go alone after dark. She then begins to explain the unwritten rules. The ones the madam didn't mention. The madam's name is Cora, she says. Don't ever call her anything else. Don't steal from her. Don't lie to her. And don't ever hold back money from a customer. She has eyes everywhere. She points a thumb back down the hallway. The girls in the rooms closer to the front. The ones with windows, they're the top earners. They get the better clothes, the better food, first pick of the hot water. We're back here in the, well, she calls it the freshman dormitory. This reveals the internal hierarchy of the brothel. A competitive system designed to keep the women focused on earning. You weren't just working for the madam, you were competing against the other women for the small comforts that made this life barely tolerable. Here's a bizarre and somewhat sad detail of daily life: the furniture. Historians who have examined the inventories of these establishments have noted that while the downstairs saloon might be lavishly decorated with a fancy bar and mirrors to attract customers, the upstairs rooms were brutally functional. However, a common feature in many cribs was a small, decorative music box. It was an odd touch of forced sentimentality in an otherwise bleak environment. The idea was that the tinkling music would create a brief, artificial sense of romance or fantasy, masking the stark, commercial nature of the encounter for the client, and perhaps for the woman herself. It was another prop in the grand performance. "And the jumbo," Jonesy says, her voice dropping lower. "The ledger. She'll call you in once a week to review your account. Don't argue with the numbers. You can't win. Just nod and say you'll work harder." She looks at you, really looks at you. And for a moment, the tough voice odd cracks. You see a glimmer of the girl she used to be. "Listen," she says quietly. "My advice, don't think too much. Thinking is what gets you in trouble here. Just do the work. Try to save a little on the side if you can, though God knows how, and hope for a lucky break. A miner strikes it rich and wants a wife. Any wife. It happens. Not often. But it happens. The lucky break. It was the great, sustaining myth of the frontier brothel. The Cinderella story of being rescued by a wealthy client. While there are a few documented cases of this happening, academic studies of census records and town directories from the period show it was exceptionally rare. For the vast majority of women, there was no rescue. The profession was not a temporary stepping stone to a better life, it was a final destination. The argument is whether this myth was a genuine, if slim, hope that women clung to, or if it was a narrative actively encouraged by madams to keep their workforce compliant and docile. Josie straightens up, her brief moment of vulnerability gone. "Cora's sending up a dress for you. You're on the floor in an hour." She gives you one last look, a mixture of pity and professional indifference. "Good luck, new girl." She leaves, pulling the door closed behind her. You are left alone in the small, dark space. The muffled sounds of the saloon below feel like they're coming from a different planet. You sit down on the edge of the lumpy mattress. The bed springs groan in protest. You look around at the bare plank walls, the empty hooks, the pitcher of cold water. This is your room. This is your home. And as Josie said, the bell for it started ticking the moment you walked in. An hour later, there's a sharp knock on your door. It's not Josie, but another girl you haven't seen before. She doesn't introduce herself, simply thrusts a bundle of shimmering fabric into your hands and says, "Cora says to wear this, and hurry up." Then she's gone. You hold up the dress. It's a garish shade of crimson, made of cheap, shiny satin that rustles when it moves. The neckline is cut far lower than anything you have ever worn, and the corset that comes with it is stiffened, menacingly structured. It's a costume, designed for a role you don't know how to play. Putting it on feels like shedding your own skin and borrowing someone else's, someone bolder and sadder than you. The corset is a cage within a cage, cinching your waist so tightly it's hard to take a full breath. When you look at your reflection in the small, cloudy mirror above the washstand, you barely recognize yourself. The dress is loud and cheap, but it transforms you. It erases the factory girl, the weary traveler, and replaces her with the saloon girl, a creation of fabric and expectation. Downstairs, the saloon is even more crowded and chaotic than before. The air is a solid wall of smoke and noise. Cora catches your eye from her usual perch and gives you a sharp, commanding nod towards the main floor. Your first night of work has officially begun. Your first task is simple: carry a tray of whiskey glasses through the crowd. It's a terrifying ordeal. The floor is slick with spilled beer and discarded peanut shells. You're each jostled and bumped by miners and cowboys, their hands brushing against your back and arms. They call out to you, "Hey, darling, look what the cat dragged in." Their words slurred, their laughter booming. You keep your eyes down, focusing on not dropping the tray, your face burning with a mixture of fear and humiliation. Later, a grizzled prospector with a beard that smells of bacon grease grabs your wrist and pulls you onto his lap. "Let's have a little dance. Pretty thing," he bellows, though he remains firmly seated. You freeze, your body rigid with shock. You look frantically towards Cora, but she's busy talking to another customer, seemingly oblivious. You remember Josie's advice, don't think too much. You force a brittle smile and allow him to hold you there while he finishes his drink, his hand resting uncomfortably high on your waist. This is the beginning of your education in a new kind of currency. Not dollars and cents, but smiles, feigned laughter, and the careful management of a customer's ego. Every interaction is a transaction. At the end of the week, Cora calls you into her small office behind the bar. The room is cramped and smells of cigar smoke and ink. She gestures for you to sit, and turns the large, leather-bound ledger towards you. "Your first week's accounting," she announces, her tone flat and businesslike. Your eyes scan the page. On one side, under earnings, is a small, pitiful number. It's your share of the drinks you sold in the company. You kept on a few terrifying, disorienting trips up the back stairs. You had clung to that number in your mind, imagining it as the first small step towards freedom. But then you look at the other side of the page, the expenses column, and your heart sinks. The list is long and detailed. There's a charge for the train ticket west, far more than you were told it would cost. There's a charge for room and board, a weekly fee that alone eclipses half your earnings. Then comes the real shock, the wardrobe. The crimson satin dress, the one that already has a tear in the seam from being grabbed, is listed at a price that could have fed your family for a month back east. The shoes, the stockings, the cheap perfume, the single bar of soap, every item is meticulously listed and exorbitantly priced. This was the cold, hard mouth of the system. Some historians have managed to find and study these old ledgers, and they are shocking documents. They reveal a system of predatory lending that would make a modern-day loan shark blush. They fine for being late, a fee for a torn dress, a charge for medicine provided by the house. It was a financial trap, pure and simple. You stare at the final number at the bottom of the page. After your earnings are deducted from your expenses, you are not just penniless. You are in debt. You have worked a week of grueling, soul-crushing hours, and you are further from freedom than when you arrived. "Is there a problem?" Cora asks, her pen tapping impatiently on the desk. You open your mouth to protest, to question the price of the dress, to argue that you never agreed to this, but you look at her cold, unyielding face and the words die in your throat. You are in a town where she is a powerful figure and you are a nobody. You have no contract, no allies, no recourse. To argue would be to brand yourself as difficult, and you've already seen what happens to difficult girls. They get the worst clients, the dirtiest rooms, and eventually, a one-way ticket to the street. "No, ma'am," you whisper, the words tasting like ash. "No problem." "Good," she says, closing the ledger with a decisive thud. "I expect to see improvement next week. You have potential. Girl, don't waste it." You walk out of the office in a daze. The noise of the saloon seems distant and muted. The trap is no longer a suspicion, it's a certainty. The ledger is not a record of your finances, it's a tally of the links in your chain. Every drink you pour, every forced smile, every trip up those stairs will not be for your own salvation, but to pay down a debt that is designed to grow forever. The chilling, little-known fact is that this debt was often considered transferable. If a madam sold her business, her girls' debts were sold right along with the furniture and the liquor stock, listed assets on the balance sheet. You weren't just an employee, you were part of the inventory. Historians still argue about the rare cases of women who managed to overcome this system. Did they do it through exceptional business acumen? Saving tiny amounts in secret, did they benefit from the patronage of a single, wealthy client, or were they just the beneficiaries of a clerical error or a madam's rare moment of benevolence? Whatever the reason, they were the outliers, the statistical anomalies. For most women, like you, the ledger was a life sentence, written in ink, from which there was no appeal. You now understand. The gilded cage is not the saloon, it's the ledger, and you are trapped within its pages. Your life settles into a grim, repetitive rhythm, dictated by the rising and setting of the sun, but in reverse. The day is for sleeping, or trying to. You retreat to your small, windowless crib, but sleep is a shallow, restless thing. The daytime sounds of the town, the hammering from the blacksmith, the shouts of wagon drivers, the barking of dogs filter through the thin walls, even with the door closed. The saloon below is never truly quiet. There's always the sound of cleaning, of barrels being rolled, of Cora's sharp voice giving orders. But the real performance begins at dusk. This is when you descend the stairs, transformed once again into the saloon girl. You are no longer you, you are a commodity, an entertainer. The centerpiece of the saloon is the long, polished bow, but the real stage is the floor itself, and your primary job is to keep the performance lively. You learn to navigate the crowded room with a tray full of drinks, developing a sixth sense for a lurching drunk or a sudden shove. You learn to pour whiskey with a steady hand, even when your heart is pounding. You learn the art of the short pour, a trick of the trade where you make the drink look fuller than it is, saving the house money and getting the customer to order the next one faster. The piano player, a man named Silas whose face is perpetually locked in an expression of profound boredom, becomes a sort of conductor for the evening's chaos. You learn his repertoire by heart when he plays a lively ragtime tune. It's a cue to encourage the men to dance. Dancing is a clumsy, stumping affair on the sawdust-covered floor, with men who are more interested in holding you close than in following any particular steps. You learn to smile through the smell of stale sweat and unwashed denim, to let them spin you until you're dizzy, all making sure their grip doesn't become too rough. When Silas shifts to a slow, maudlin ballad, it's a signal for a different kind of performance. This is when the lonely prospectors, their pockets empty after a bad week, want to talk. They'll buy you a drink, usually a small glass of colored water or flat soda that the bartender passes to you with a wink, but which the customer is charged full price for, and they will tell you their stories. They talk about their homes back east, the wives and children they miss, their dreams of striking it rich. You learn to nod, to listen with feigned sympathy, to offer a word of encouragement. You become a repository for their loneliness, a blank slate onto which they project their hopes and sorrows. It's an exhausting performance, a constant emotional tightrope walk. You have to be cheerful but not too forward, friendly but not too familiar, alluring but not too available, at least not for free. It's a set of unwritten rules you learn through trial and error. A misplaced word could offend a customer and cost you a tip. A moment of genuine weariness showing on your face could earn you a sharp glare from Cora. Here's a strange and little discussed act of saloon life: the treats. To keep the girls energized and to add to the festive and profitable atmosphere, madams would often have the house buy rounds of treats for the girls. This wasn't just drinks. It could be a box of expensive, imported chocolates or a plate of oysters, both incredible luxuries on the frontier. The girls would be encouraged to share them with their favorite customers. It created a bizarre parody of a high society party, a fleeting moment of faux glamour in the grime. Of course, the cost of these gifts would eventually find its way back onto the girls' tabs in one form or another. You become an expert at reading the men. You can spot the difference between the quiet, melancholy farmer and the swaggering, volatile outlaw from the moment they walk through the door. You learn which ones are prone to violence after a few drinks, and you learn to make yourself scarce when they get that particular look in their eyes. You learn that the quiet ones are often the most desperately lonely, and the loudest ones are often the most insecure. Historians often debate the level of agency these women had in their nightly interactions. Were they simply passive victims, moved around the saloon floor like chess pieces by the madam and the customers, or were they skilled social actors, using their wits and charm to manipulate situations to their advantage, maximizing their earnings and minimizing their risks. The truth, as always, is likely somewhere in the middle. While the power imbalance was immense, survival depended on developing a sharp, intuitive understanding of human psychology. You had to be a performer, a therapist, and a risk assessor, all at the same time. Sometimes, in the middle of the noise and the smoke, you'll catch Josie S.I. across the room. She'll give you a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, a silent acknowledgement of the shared absurdity of it all. These fleeting moments of solidarity are the only things that feel real. At the end of the night, when the last drunk has been pushed out the door and the lamps are turned down, a profound quiet descends. The saloon, stripped of its clientele, looks shabby and sad. The floor is a mess of mud, sawdust, and trash. The air hangs thick and stale. You and the other girls trudge up the stairs, your costumes feeling heavy and soiled, the painted smiles wiped from your faces. You return to your tiny room. The character you played all night said at the door. You lie in the dark, the ghost of the piano music still ringing in your ears, and you feel nothing but a bone-deep exhaustion. The performance is over, for now, but you know you'll have to do it all again tomorrow. It doesn't take you long to realize that even in this self-contained world of exploitation, there is a distinct and rigid class system. You are living in it. The house, the gilded cage, is a microcosm of a larger society, with its own aristocrats, middle class, and bottom feeders, and your position in it is precarious. The top of the pyramid is occupied by the parlor girls. These are the women who have the rooms at the front of the hallway, the ones with the windows that overlook the main street. They are core star performers. They tend to be the newest arrivals who are still fresh-faced, or the most beautiful, or the most skilled in the art of conversation and manipulation. They are not expected to hustle for drinks on the main saloon floor. Instead, they entertain select, high-paying clients in a separate, more lavishly decorated room called the parlor. This room is Cora's showpiece. It has a velvet-covered sofa, framed pictures on the walls, and even a small, dusty bookcase to lend it an air of refinement. Here, the whiskey is of a slightly better quality, served in cleaner glasses. The parlor girls are allowed to wear more elegant gowns, made of better fabric than your cheap satin. They are the illusion of the court saint, a sophisticated companion, a fantasy designed for men with more money and perhaps a more delicate ego. They earn more, their share of the fees is higher, and their debt to Cora is, if not small, at least manageable. They are the ones who get the hot water first, the better cuts of meat at mealtime. They are the house elite. Then there is the middle tier. The dance hall girls are working girls. This is where you and Josie exist. You are the backbone of the establishment, the infantry. Your job is on the main floor, in the thick of the noise and the chaos. You dance, you serve drinks, you laugh at bad jokes, and you escort a steady stream of mid-tier clients up the back stairs to your functional, windowless cribs. You are not glamorous, you are dependable. Your clothes are serviceable but show signs of wear. You are in a constant, grinding struggle with the ledger, sometimes managing to break even for a week, only to fall behind again with an unexpected fine or a mandatory new dress. And then, at the very bottom, are the crib girls who don't even work in a saloon. You see them sometimes when you're sent to the general store on a daytime errand. They operate out of a row of small, identical shacks on the edge of town, often in a district explicitly designated for this purpose, sometimes called the deadline or the line. Their rooms are even smaller and bleaker than yours, often with a door that is a simple blanket or a flimsy curtain. They work for themselves, not a madame, which sounds like freedom but is in fact a more brutal form of existence. They have no protection, no bouncer at the door. They charge mere pocket change and see a high volume of the roughest, most dangerous clients. Their lives are often the shortest. Every girl in the gilded cage lives in fear of the day Cora decides she's no longer profitable and tells her to go work the line. This internal hierarchy is a powerful tool of control. Cora fosters it, encourages it. She'll compliment a parlor girl in front of you, or hold up one girl's high earnings as an example to the others. It creates a sense of competition, a constant striving to please Cora and climb the ladder, or at least to avoid slipping down it. It turns the women against each other, making true solidarity almost impossible. You might share a moment of quiet understanding with Josie, but you are also keenly aware that if a spot opens up in one of the front rooms, you would both do whatever it takes to get it. Here is a truly bizarre but documented practice that highlights this hierarchy, the pecking order for perfume. In some of the more upscale establishments, the madam would control the distribution of perfume. The top-tier parlor girls would be given more expensive, imported French perfumes. The mid-tier girls would get cheaper, American-made floral scents. And the girls at the bottom of the house hierarchy might only be allowed a simple rosewater or nothing at all. Scent became a literal status symbol, an invisible uniform that announced your rank to the other women and to discerning clients the moment you entered a room. The debate among historians on this topic is subtle but important. Did this internal class system genuinely reflect a woman's value in terms of beauty or skill, as the madams claimed, or was it a more arbitrary system, used by madams to reward loyalty and punish dissent? Regardless of a woman's actual earnings, evidence suggests the latter was often true. A woman who was beautiful and a good earner, but was deemed too independent or mouthy, might find herself demoted from the parlor to the main floor as a form of punishment and a warning to others. Your status was never secure, it was a privilege granted by the madam, and it could be revoked at any time. You see this play out one evening. A girl named Eliza, one of the parlor girls, gets into a quiet but firm argument with Cora over a charge on her ledger. The next night, Eliza is not in the parlor. She is on the main floor, wearing a dress much like yours, with a humiliated and defiant look on her face. The other girls see it. They understand the message. You are all replaceable. The system is designed to remind you of this every single day. The desire for a slightly softer bed, a dress made of velvet instead of satin, a room with a window. These small, manufactured desires are the strings that keep the puppets dancing. The physical toll of this life begins to wear on you almost immediately. It's a slow, creeping erosion of your health, a collection of ailments that become your constant companions. You are perpetually tired. Your sleep schedule is a rebellion against the natural world, and the few hours of rest you get are shallow and unrefreshing. Dark circles form under your eyes, which you learn to cover with a dusting of rice powder from a small, expensive tune that Cora sells. Your body aches. It's not just the long hours standing and walking on the hard saloon floor, but the ghosts. They are instruments of constant, low-grade misery. You wear them for 10 to 12 hours a day, and they dig into your ribs, restrict your breathing, and can lead to chronic indigestion and shortness of breath. At the end of the night, when you finally unlace the corset in the privacy of your room, the feeling of relief is so profound it's almost painful. You can feel your internal organs shifting back into their proper places. Then there is the issue of hygiene. The Gilded Cage presents itself as a high-class establishment, but sanitation is a constant struggle on the frontier. The water you use to wash, drawn from a communal well, is often brackish and of questionable purity. You are given one small, coarse towel a week. The outhouse in the back is a foul-smelling pit that attracts swarms of flies in the summer. Under these conditions, minor infections are common. A small cut can become inflamed. A cold can linger for weeks, turning into a chesty, rattling cough that echoes through the thin walls of the upstairs hallway. The food, provided by the house in charge to your account, is monotonous and nutritionally poor. The staples are salt pork, beans, and hard biscuits. Fresh fruits and vegetables are a rare luxury. This diet, combined with the lack of sunlight and fresh air, leaves you feeling sluggish and weak. You realize that your own health is just another commodity, to be maintained only to the point where you can still work. If you get truly sick, You are not a patient to be cared for, you are a broken piece of equipment. You see it happen to a girl named Mary. She comes down with a fever, a racking cough, and chills that leave her shaking under her thin blanket. For the first day, Cora is merely annoyed, docking Mary's pay for missing a shift. By the second day, as Mary's condition worsens, Cora's annoyance turns to cold pragmatism. She sends for the doctor, a man who also serves as the town's barber and has no formal medical training. He takes a cursory look at Mary, pronounces it lung fever, and sells Cora a bottle of patent medicine for a high price, a price that is immediately added to Mary's ever-growing debt. The medicine does nothing. Mary lies in her small room. Her fevered moans and coughing fits are constant. Grim reminder of your collective vulnerability. The other girls, you included, are a mixture of fearful and resentful. You are scared of catching what she has. You are also resentful because her absence means more work for the rest of you. It's a cruel and dehumanizing calculation, but it's one the system forces you to make. After a few days, Mary is moved out. Cora says she's been sent to a charity hospital in a bigger city, but no one believes her. Everyone suspects she was simply left in a back room to either recover or not on her own, or perhaps even abandoned. Her room is aired out. Her meager belongings are cleared away, and by the next night, a new girl is sleeping in her bed. It's as if Mary never existed. This brings up a fascinating and grim little-known fact about frontier healthcare. In the absence of real doctors, many madams became the de facto healthcare providers for their women. They kept a stock of patent medicines and folk remedies, and their knowledge, passed down from one madam to another, was a strange mix of practical wisdom and dangerous quackery. They knew how to set a simple fracture and how to brew teas for menstrual cramps. But they also relied on remedies containing high levels of alcohol, opium, or even mercury to treat various ailments. The historical debate here centers on the motivation for this care. Were madams providing medical attention out of a sense of responsibility or compassion for their girls, or was it purely a business decision? A way to keep their investments functional and working? The evidence overwhelmingly suggests the latter. The cost of any medicine or doctor's visit was always passed on to the woman, often at a significant markup. Sickness was not a tragedy, it was a business expense, and a potentially profitable one at that. A woman who was too sick to work was a liability, and liabilities were disposed of quickly. You learn to live with the constant, low-level physical discomfort. You learn to ignore the gnawing in your stomach, the ache in your back, the tickle in your throat. You learn to patch up your own clothes, to hide your ailments as best you can, because to admit to weakness is to take a step closer to the door. Your body is no longer your own. It is a tool for your work, and you must maintain it just enough to keep functioning, knowing that if it breaks, it will be discarded and replaced without a second thought. While the daily grind of exhaustion and minor ailments wears you down, there is a much larger, more terrifying shadow that looms over your life and the lives of every woman in the gilded cage. It's a fear that is rarely spoken of aloud, but it's always present, a whispered dread in the quiet moments in the upstairs hallway. It's the fear of the disease. You first hear the stories in hushed, fragmented conversations with the other girls. They talk about a woman who worked in a saloon down the street, how she developed sores that wouldn't heal, how she started losing her hair, how her mind began to wander. They talk about her being sent away, and no one ever saw her again. They use euphemisms, the bad sickness, the French disease, or simply the poison. What they are talking about is syphilis. You learn to recognize the fear in the eyes of the other women. You see them subtly inspecting the men who come into the saloon, looking for any outward sign of sickness, but you quickly realize it's a futile exercise. The men who pass through these frontier towns are a transient, anonymous tide. They are soldiers from lonely forts, miners from isolated camps, cowboys from non-cattle drives. You know nothing of their history, their health, their lives beyond the swinging doors of the saloon. Every encounter is a gamble, a roll of the dice with your life as the stake. Syphilis and gonorrhea were rampant in the 19th century American West. In an era before antibiotics, they were devastating, often incurable diseases. Gonorrhea could lead to chronic pain, sterility, and inflammatory diseases, but syphilis was the true terror. Its progression was a slow-motion horror story. The initial stage might only be a single, painless sore, but then it would retreat into the body, lying dormant for years, only to re-emerge in a secondary stage with rashes, fevers, and hair loss. The final, tertiary stage was catastrophic, leading to blindness, paralysis, severe disfigurement, and a descent into madness as the disease attacked the brain and nervous system. You live with this knowledge every single day. Every unexplained ache, every small skin irritation sends a jolt of pure panic through you. You discreetly check your own body for any signs, your heart pounding with dread. Cora, the madam, treats the issue with a cold, business-like pragmatism. She conducts her own inspections, a humiliating weekly ritual where she checks the girls for any obvious signs of infection. This is not for your protection, but for the protection of her business. A reputation for having sick girls would be financially ruinous. If she finds anything suspicious, the girl is immediately confined to her room, and if the symptoms don't clear up, she is dismissed. There is no treatment offered, only exile. Here's a disturbing and little-known detail from the period: the attempts at preventative medicine. Without a true understanding of germ theory, the remedies were often useless and sometimes harmful. Women were encouraged to use various douches and washes after each client, using solutions made of harsh chemicals like carbolic acid or even mercury compounds. These didn't prevent the transmission of disease but often caused chemical burns, chronic irritation, and internal damage, making the women even more susceptible to infection. It was a perfect storm of medical ignorance and desperation. You see the reality of it firsthand. A quiet girl named Annie, who keeps to herself, starts to complain of a persistent rash. She tries to hide it, but Cora notices. Annie is confined to her room. You hear her crying at night. A week later, she's gone. Her meager belongings are bundled up and left by the back door. The other girls don't talk about it. They just work a little harder. Their smiles a little more strained. The fear a little more palpable in the air. The historical record on this is chillingly clear. Archaeologists excavating cemeteries in old frontier towns have found the remains of young women with the telltale signs of advanced syphilis etched into their bones. Hospital records from the period. They're sparse. List complications from venereal disease as a common cause of death for women with no last name or listed occupation. Historians still debate the true prevalence of these diseases. Some argue that while the fear was immense, the actual infection rates may have been slightly lower than the most sensational accounts suggest. Others, citing military and public health records from the era, argue that the problem was a full-blown epidemic, a public health crisis that was deliberately ignored and hidden because it primarily affected a class of women that society deemed disposable. This constant, underlying terror changes you. It robs you of any last vestige of intimacy or human connection in your work. Each encounter becomes a purely mechanical act, overshadowed by a cold, clinical fear. It creates a profound sense of being unclean, not just socially, but physically. You feel tainted. No, the water in the basin never seems to get you truly clean. It's a stain that goes deeper than the skin. The fear of the poison is a heavier chain than any debt on Cora's ledger. Because it's a debt that could be collected from your own body, with no possibility of parole. In this world of constant threat, debt, violence, disease, there is another secret that must be kept at all costs. A biological reality that becomes a life-threatening crisis: pregnancy. For a woman in your position, a missed menstrual cycle is not a reason for hope or joy. It is a harbinger of absolute disaster. It is a secret that you must guard with a desperate, all-consuming terror. Your body, which already feels like a commodity owned by the house, betrays you in the most fundamental way. The early signs: a wave of nausea in the morning, a new tenderness in your breasts, A profound and unfamiliar fatigue are not symptoms to be managed, but clues to a crime you have inadvertently committed, a crime against the business. A pregnant prostitute was the ultimate liability for a madam like Cora. A pregnant woman cannot work, at least not for long. She is a drain on resources, occupying a room and consuming food without generating income. She is a visible, undeniable symbol of the reality of the business, a reality that the whole performance of romance and entertainment is designed to conceal. You watch the other women, and you see the subtle ways they track their cycles, the quiet relief on their faces when their time comes, the flicker of panic in their eyes when it is late. There are hushed conversations in the hallway, the sharing of folk remedies meant to bring on a late period strong, bitter herbal teas, violent exercises, or sitting in baths of dangerously hot water. Most of these are ineffective, but they are born of sheer desperation. One of the girls, a quiet redhead named Sarah, begins to change. She starts wearing her corset looser, complaining of constant tiredness. She's been a good earner, one of Cora's favorites, so for a while, it goes unnoticed, but the other girls see it. You see it. You see the way she presses a hand to her lower back when she thinks no one is looking. You see the faint, dark shadows that appear under her eyes. The secret becomes a physical and emotional prison. Sarah grows more withdrawn. Her laughter on the saloon floor sounds brittle and forced. She lives in a state of constant, high-alert anxiety. Every interaction with Cora is fraught with the fear of discovery. Discovery would mean immediate expulsion. There would be no sympathy, no support. Cora would see it as a betrayal, a foolish mistake that impacts her bottom line. A pregnant girl would be thrown out onto the street with no money, no protection, and a reputation that would make finding any other kind of work impossible. For a woman on the frontier, to be pregnant and alone was a dire situation. To be a pregnant former prostitute and alone was essentially a death sentence. Here's a sad and little-known piece of social history from the time the so-called lying-in homes. While some charitable institutions existed in larger cities to help destitute pregnant women, they were often fiercely moralistic. To be admitted, a woman had to prove she was of good character. A fallen woman would be turned away at the door. Some unscrupulous private homes existed, offering to take in pregnant women for a high fee. But these were often dangerous places where the mortality rate for both mother and child was astronomically high. For a woman in your position, these were not real options. The historical debate around this issue is a difficult one. It revolves around the children. What happened to the babies who were born in these circumstances? The historical record is fragmented and grim. Some were abandoned on church steps or at the door of the town's one respectable family. Some were given up to baby farms, horrifically neglectful orphanages where infant mortality was the norm. In some rare cases, a child might be unofficially adopted by another woman in the brothel, or even the madam herself, raised in the strange, closed-off world of the saloon. But for the most part, the fate of these children is a historical void, a testament to a society that was unwilling to acknowledge their existence. Sarah's secret cannot be kept forever. One evening, she faints on the saloon floor as the other girls rush to help her. Loosening her corset, the slight swell of her belly becomes undeniable. Cora is there in an instant. Her face is not one of concern, but of cold, hard fury. She says nothing. She simply points a single, sharp finger towards the back stairs. The message is clear. Sarah is confined to her room. You and the other girls are forbidden to speak to her. You hear her sobbing through the thin wooden planks. Her fate is now being decided. Will she be thrown out tomorrow morning, or will she be forced to seek the only other option available, the option that everyone fears? The one that represents the ultimate, desperate gamble, a secret, back alley procedure. The secret of her pregnancy is out, and it has been replaced by a new, more dangerous secret, one that will unfold in the shadows of the house. The house falls into a strange, tense quiet in the days following Sarah's collapse. Heard or remains closed. The official story from Cora is that Sarah is ill. But everyone knows the truth. The unspoken question hangs in the air, heavy and suffocating. What will be done to throw her out would be bad for business. A public display of the house's dirty laundry. Cora is a pragmatist above all else. She needs to solve the problem of Sarah, not just dispose of her. Late one night, long after the last customer has stumbled out into the darkness, a visitor arrives at the back door of the saloon. You glimpse her from the top of the stairs, an older woman, cloaked and hunched, carrying a dark leather bag. She is not a customer. She is the town's midwife, a woman who deals in secrets, whose skills extend beyond delivering babies to other things. She is a practitioner of last resorts. She is quickly, unquietly ushered upstairs to Sarah's room by Cora. The door closes, and a towel is stuffed into the crack at the bottom. The other girls, you included, retreat to your own rooms, but no one sleeps. You lie in the dark, your ears straining, listening. The sounds are faint, but horrifully clear in the silence of the house. You hear a low murmur of voices. You hear the clink of metal on ceramic. And then, you hear a single, sharp cry of pain from Sarah, quickly muffled. It is followed by a long, low moaning that seems to go on for an eternity. This is the grim reality of abortion in the 19th century. In the absence of safe, legal, or medical options, women were forced to turn to clandestine practitioners who used methods that were brutally invasive and lethally dangerous. The tools could be anything from knitting needles to button hooks to pieces of wire unsterilized. Crude instruments used to induce a miscarriage. Other methods involved ingesting toxic herbal concoctions or poisons like turpentine or lead, which were meant to cause uterine contractions but could just as easily cause massive organ failure and death. You lie in your bed, pressing your hands over your ears, but you can't block out the sounds. You can't block out the thought that this could be you. This is the ultimate consequence. The final, desperate act in a life with no good choices. Every woman in the house understands that Sarah's room has become a place of immense suffering, a private, desperate battlefield. A little-known fact that highlights the sheer desperation is the market for abortifacient patent medicines. Newspapers of the era were filled with thinly veiled advertisements for products like Drive, Peter's French renovating pills, or Madame Ray's Tell's preventive powders. They were marketed as remedies for female complaints or menstrual obstructions, but everyone knew their intended purpose. These products were unregulated, often containing dangerous substances, and their efficacy was dubious at best. Yet women spent their precious money on them, clinging to the hope of a simple, pill-based solution to a life-altering problem. They were selling hope in a bottle, and the currency was desperation. The historical debate on this topic focuses on the women who performed these procedures. Were they universally predatory ghouls, exploiting desperate women for money, or were some of them perhaps women themselves acting out of a complex, if misguided, sense of female solidarity, offering a dangerous service because they knew the alternative, a ruined life or a back-alley self-attempt, was even worse? The figure of the back-alley abortionist is one of the most vilified in history. But the reality was likely a spectrum. Some were undoubtedly charlatans, but others may have been midwives who saw themselves as providing a necessary, if tragic, service in a society that offered no other recourse. There was purse. The moaning from Sarah's room subsides, replaced by an eerie silence. Eventually, the midwife sits out the back door and vanishes back into the night as quietly as she arrived. Cora emerges from the room, her face grim and set. She says nothing to the watching, fearful eyes in the hallway. The next morning, the doctor is summoned. This time, his visit is not for show. A short while later, you see him and another man carrying Sarah out on a makeshift stretcher. Her face is ashen white, her body limp. A sheet is pulled up to her chin. They carry her out the back, and you never see her again. Later, you overhear Cora talking to the bartender. The infection took her, she says, her voice flat. It happens. It's a lie, but it's the official story, the one that protects the house. The truth is that Sarah likely died from hemorrhage or a rampant septic infection caused by the unsterile procedure. Her name is never mentioned again. Her debt on the ledger is quietly wiped clean. In the cold calculus of the business, her death has resolved her account. The incident casts a long, dark pall over the house. The music in the saloon seems more tinny, the laughter more hollow. The fear among the girls is now a tangible thing. You look at each other, and you see Sarah's fate reflected in your own eyes. You have just witnessed the system's final solution for a woman who becomes a liability. The memory of her muffled cry will stay with you, a permanent ghost in the upstairs hallway of the gilded cage. The world outside the swinging doors of the gilded cage is a constant, stinging reminder of your new social status. You are an outcast, the pariah, in the closed-off ecosystem of the saloon. You had a role, a purpose, but the moment you step onto the dusty street for a daytime errand, you are nothing more than a soiled dove, a woman whose presence is an affront to public decency. This becomes painfully clear during your trips to the general store. The store is the social hub of the town, a place where miners buy supplies, ranchers gossip, and the few respectable women of the town gather. These are the wives and daughters of the merchants, the banker, the preacher. They are the good women, and their goodness is defined in direct opposition to everything you represent. When you walk into the store, conversation ceases. The respectable women, dressed in their modest calico dresses and sunbonnets, will physically turn their backs to you. They will pull their children closer, as if your very presence is a contagion. They look right through you, their faces masks of cold, pious disapproval. If their husbands are present, the men will either avoid your gaze out of a sense of public shame or, worse, offer a subtle, knowing smirk, a silent acknowledgement of where they might have seen you last night. The storekeeper, a man who gladly takes Gora's money for her weekly bulk orders of whiskey and supplies, treats you with a brusque, dismissive impatience. He serves you last, even if you were there first. He speaks to you in monosyllables, his eyes averted. You are a necessary evil, a source of income he is ashamed to acknowledge. You learn to make these trips as quickly as possible, to keep your eyes downcast, to make yourself small and invisible. The weight of their collective judgment is a physical thing, pressing down on your shoulders. You are a walking, breathing symbol of the town's hypocrisy. You are the secret sin that everyone publicly condemns but many privately consume, and for this, you are the one who must bear all the shame. A strange and poignant detail that emerges from diaries and letters of the period is the concept of the other side of the street. In many frontier towns, unwritten social law dictated that soiled doves were expected to walk on a specific side of the main street, often the side where the saloons were located. To be seen on the respectable side was a grave social trespass. This created a literal, physical line of social segregation. You can imagine the daily humiliation of being forced to cross the street to avoid walking past the church or the home of a decent family. You feel this ostracism most acutely on Sundays, while the rest of the town is dressed in their finest. Heading to the small wooden church, you are confined to the saloon. The gilded cage is officially closed on Sunday mornings as a concession to public morality. But for you, it is simply a time of confinement. You can hear the faint sound of the church bell ringing, a sound from a world you are no longer allowed to enter. You are not just excluded from the community's social life, but from its spiritual life as well. The historical debate here centers on the complexity of this social shunning. Was it purely a moral judgment, a straightforward condemnation of your profession by a pious society, or was there a more complex economic and social anxiety at play? Some historians argue that the intense hostility of respectable women was driven, in part, by a deep-seated fear on the frontier, where the gender imbalance was so stark. A single woman, even a fallen one, was still a potential rival for the affections and resources of men. The soiled doves, with their fancy dresses and direct access to men, represented a strange, distorted form of female economic power that was deeply threatening to the traditional domestic sphere. The shunning was a way of reinforcing the boundaries of their own status, of making it clear who was in and who was out. The isolation is profound. You have no friends outside the walls of the saloon. You cannot join a sewing circle, attend a town picnic, or even share a polite nod with another woman on the street. Your world has shrunk to the smoky interior of the gilded cage and the other women who share your fate. They are the only people who understand, the only ones who do not judge you. This complete social exile is one of the heaviest burdens you carry. The debt, the diseases, the violence, these are tangible threats, but the ostracism is a slow-acting poison to the soul. It forces you to internalize the shame that society projects onto you. You begin to see yourself through their eyes as fallen, as unclean, as less than human. It reinforces the walls of your cage, not with bars of iron, but with the invisible, unbreakable barrier of social contempt. You are a ghost in your own town, visible only to those who wish to use you, and invisible to everyone else. Confined within the walls of the gilded cage, your only community is the other women who share your fate. This small, isolated sorority becomes the center of your universe. Your relationships with these women are the most complex and intense you have ever known. A volatile mixture of camaraderie, rivalry, affection, and betrayal. They are your sisters and your competitors. Your only solace and sometimes your greatest source of pain. In the quiet daylight hours, before the performance of the evening begins, there are moments of genuine connection. You gather in the empty saloon or in one of the larger front rooms, mending your dresses, brushing each other's hair, sharing stories. You talk about your lives before you came west, the families you left behind, the dreams you once had. In these moments, the hardened facades you wear for the customers and for Cora melt away, and you see the vulnerable, frightened girls underneath. You learn each other's histories. There's Josie, who ran away from a cruel stepfather. There's Carmen, who followed a lover west only to be abandoned. There's Pearl, who was widowed at 19 with no family and no prospects. Each story is different, but they all end in the same place, a desperate gamble that lead them here. These shared histories create a powerful, unspoken bond. You are the only ones who truly understand the weight of the life you are living. You develop your own private culture, a world of inside jokes and shared rituals. You might save a piece of candy from a customer's treat box for another girl who is having a hard day. You learn to read each other's moods with a single glance across the crowded saloon floor. If you see a customer becoming aggressive with Josie, you might create a diversion, spilling a drink or calling for her attention, to give her an excuse to get away. It's a silent, subtle dance of mutual protection, a small act of rebellion against the chaos. A fascinating, little-known aspect of this internal culture was the use of nicknames. While Cora insisted on a certain level of decorum among themselves, the women often had nicknames for each other, for Cora, and for their regular clients. These names, often witty or darkly humorous, were a way of reclaiming a small piece of their identity and creating a private language that their exploiters couldn't understand. A particularly cheap client might be Mr. Nickel, while Cora might be referred to as the Queen Bee when she was out of earshot. It was a small, verbal form of resistance. But this sisterhood is a fragile thing, constantly threatened by the system designed to pit you against each other. Cora is a master of this. She knows that a united workforce is a threat to her authority. She fosters jealousy and competition at every turn. If a wealthy rancher comes to town and takes a liking to one particular girl, showering her with gifts and money, Cora will make sure everyone knows it. The chosen girl is elevated, given special privileges, while the others are left to watch with a mixture of envy and resentment. You feel happy for your friend's good fortune, but you also can't help the bitter thought, why not me? The hierarchy of the house is a constant source of friction. The parlor girls, with their better clothes and easier work, are a source of deep resentment for the girls on the main floor. A casual, condescending remark from a parlor girl can sour the atmosphere for days. Arguments break out over trivial things, a borrowed piece of ribbon, a suspected stolen tin of face powder, a stolen regular client. These small conflicts are magnified in the claustrophobic environment of the house, where there is no escape from each other. The historical debate on this topic is centered on the nature of these relationships. Early, more sensationalist accounts of brothel life tended to focus on the rivalries and betrayals, painting a picture of a catfight environment. More recent, feminist-inspired scholarship has sought to highlight the moments of solidarity and sisterhood, arguing that these women formed powerful bonds to survive their shared oppression. The most likely truth, supported by the few existing diaries and letters, is that both were true, often simultaneously. These women could be each other's staunchest allies in one moment and bitterest rivals the next. Their relationships were a direct reflection of the desperate, high-stakes environment they were forced to inhabit. You experience this duality firsthand with Josie. She's your closest friend in the house. She was the first to show you kindness, and she has given you invaluable advice on how to survive. But one night, a new girl arrives, younger and prettier than both of you. Cora immediately takes a shine to her, giving her a prime spot on the floor. Suddenly, you and Josie are no longer just friends, you are direct competitors, vying for the same dwindling pool of attention and money. A new tension enters your friendship, an undercurrent of professional jealousy that wasn't there before. You still share secrets and moments of laughter, but there is now a guardedness, a new awareness that your survival may come at her expense, or hers at yours. This is the true cruelty of the system. It takes the one thing that could be a source of strength, the community of women, and turns it into another to love control. It makes you complicit in your own oppression, forcing you to compete for the scraps from Cora's table. Your sisters are your rivals are your sisters, and you are all trapped together in the same gilded cage. The swinging doors of the gilded cage admit a nightly parade of the entire spectrum of frontier masculinity. Learning to manage these men, your visitors, is the most critical and dangerous skill you must master. Each man who walks through the door is a potential source of income, but also a potential threat. You become a quick study of human nature, your survival depending on your ability to read a man's intentions in his eyes, his posture, and the tone of his voice. The most common visitors are the miners. They come into town after weeks or months of backbreaking, isolating work in the hills. Their pockets heavy with gold dust and their hearts heavy with loneliness. They are often rough around the edges, their clothes caked with mud, their social skills rusty. For the most part, they are not malicious. They are simply desperate for a moment of human warmth, a reminder of a world beyond the rock and dirt of their claims. They want to drink, to hear a piano play, to have a pretty girl smile at them and listen to their stories. They are the bread and butter of the saloon's business. You learn to treat them with a kind of gentle, professional patience, laughing at their predictable jokes and feigning interest in their tales of the big strike that is always just around the corner. Then there are the cowboys. They arrive in a storm of dust and bravado after long, arduous cattle drives. They are younger, louder, and more volatile than the miners. Their energy is explosive, a mix of youthful exuberance and pent-up frustration from months on the trail. They want to spend their wages as quickly as possible on whiskey and excitement. They can be fun and flirtatious, but they can also be arrogant and prone to sudden, drunken brawls over a perceived insult or a card game. With them, you must be constantly on your guard, maintaining a light, bantering tone while always keeping a safe distance, ready to slip away if the mood turns sour. Soldiers from the nearby fort represent another type of clientele. They are often disciplined and polite, at least at the beginning of the evening, but underneath their uniforms lies a profound boredom and a deep-seated loneliness. Stationed in the middle of nowhere, they crave novelty and distraction. They are often poor, with only their meager army pay to spend, but they are regular customers, a reliable, if not lucrative, source of income for the house. And then there are the dangerous ones, the outlaws, the gamblers, the drifters who pass through town with no name and a hard look in their eyes. You learn to spot them instantly. They are quiet, watchful, and radiate a palpable sense of menace. They don't come for conversation or a clumsy dance. Their intentions are cold and direct. Cora will often steer the newer, more naive girls away from them, assigning them to more experienced women who know how to handle themselves. When you are forced to interact with one, you do so with a heightened sense of alert. Your words careful, your movements precise, your only goal to conclude the transaction as quickly and smoothly as possible. A fascinating and little-known aspect of these interactions was the souvenir culture. Many men, particularly the lonely miners, would ask for a small keepsake from their favorite girl, a ribbon from her hair, a garter, or even a small locket with her picture in it, often a generic picture provided by the madam. They would take these tokens back to their grim, isolated camps as a tangible reminder of a moment of manufactured intimacy. For the men, it was a way to possess a small piece of the fantasy. For the women, it was another part of the performance, another small item whose cost would be added to their tab. The historical debate surrounding the clientele is an interesting one. Were these men uniformly predatory and brutish, as some accounts suggest, or was the relationship more nuanced? Many historians, drawing from the letters and diaries of the men themselves, argue that for many clients, the primary motivation was not just physical release, but a desperate search for female companionship in a world almost entirely devoid of it. They sought the illusion of affection, a brief respite from the crushing loneliness and brutality of their own lives. This does not excuse the exploitative nature of the system, but it adds a layer of human tragedy to the picture, suggesting that many of the men who walked through those doors were just as trapped by the circumstances of the frontier as the women they paid for. You learn to compartmentalize. You develop a work personality, a character you put on with your satin dress and your corset. This character is cheerful, witty, and endlessly patient. She doesn't get tired. She doesn't get scared. She doesn't get sad. She is a perfect illusion. This emotional armor is your most important defense. It allows you to endure the grasping hands, the drunken whispers, the heartbreaking sad stories, and the cold, empty stares without letting it touch the real you, the one who is hidden deep inside. But sometimes, a crack appears in the armor. A young man, barely more than a boy, looks at you with eyes so full of homesickness and fear that you see a reflection of your own. Or a much older man treats you with a moment of genuine, unexpected kindness. These moments are almost more difficult to handle than the overt cruelty. They are a brief, painful reminder of the normal human interactions that you are denied. They are a glimpse of a world you have lost, and they make returning to the grim reality of your role all the more difficult. The parade of visitors continues, night after night, and you stand and greet them with a practiced smile, a professional shield against the endless tide of male loneliness and desire. In a town where the only law is the speed of a man's draw and the weight of his purse, violence is not an occasional threat, it's part of the atmosphere, as constant and unavoidable as the dust in the air. The gilded cage, with its endless supply of alcohol and its concentration of frustrated, armed men, is a tinderbox waiting for a spark. And you, and the other women, are often the ones who get burned. The violence can erupt without warning. A card game goes sour over a suspected cheat, and suddenly the table is overturned, chairs are flying, and men are grappling on the floor. A drunken argument between two miners over a mining claim escalates from shouts to fists in the blink of an eye. During these moments, your training kicks in. You don't scream. You don't run. You flatten yourself against the nearest wall or duck behind the solid oak of the bar, making yourself as small a target as possible. You wait for Cora's bouncer, a mountain of a man named Tiny, to wade in and physically throw the offenders out into the street. Then, you are expected to immediately resume your duties, stepping over broken glass and writing overturned stools as if nothing has happened. But the generalized chaos of the saloon is not the most terrifying part. The real fear comes from the personal, targeted violence directed at you. Your job requires you to be physically close to men who are often drunk, unpredictable, and accustomed to solving their problems with force. A rejection, no matter how politely phrased, can be taken as a grave insult. A customer who feels he's been overcharged for a drink or shortchanged in a dance can become instantly enraged. Your arm is grabbed with bruising force. Your wrist is twisted. You are backed into a corner. Your escape route cut off. These are nightly occurrences. Minor aggressions that you are expected to handle with a firm but placating smile. To cry out or make a scene would be to risk angering the customer further. And worse, to earn Cora's wrath for being unable to handle the clients. You learn to absorb a certain level of physical aggression as a cost of doing business. The real danger lies upstairs, behind the closed doors of the cribs. Here, you are alone, away from the eyes of the bouncer. Most encounters are blessedly brief and transactional, but sometimes, you get a man who believes that the money he paid gives him the right to do whatever he wants. He is not just buying your time, he believes he has bought you. When he becomes violent, your options are terrifyingly limited. You can fight back, but that risks enraging him further, potentially turning a rough encounter into a lethal one. You can scream, but the walls are thin, and the other girls and customers are conditioned to ignore the sounds that come from the rooms. A woman's cry of distress is just part of the nightly soundtrack of the saloon. So you learn other techniques. You learn to talk a man down, to soothe his ego, to de-escalate the situation with a careful word or a feigned submissiveness. You learn to disassociate, to mentally retreat to a place deep inside yourself where he can't touch you, while your body endures the ordeal. One of the most chilling and little-known survival tactics was the fainting trick. Some women became adept at feigning a sudden swoon or medical emergency when a situation turned violent. It was a high-risk gamble. A compassionate or merely startled man might back off, concerned or confused. A cruel one might see it as a trick and become even more violent. But in a situation with no good options, it was sometimes the only tool available to interrupt an assault. There is no legal recourse. The town marshal or sheriff is not your protector. You know this because you see him in the saloon, accepting a free drink from Cora. He is part of the system, not an enforcer of justice for women like you. If you were to go to him, bruised and bleeding, to report an assault, you would be met with contempt. You would be asked what you did to provoke it. You would be told that this is what you should expect, given your profession. The law was written by men, for men. A prostitute's body was not considered her own property, and therefore, a crime against it was not a crime against a person, but at most, a minor disruption of public order. The historical debate here is almost non-existent because the evidence is so one-sided, while official court records are sparse. The diaries of frontier citizens, newspaper articles, and the women's own testimonies often given years later paint a grimly consistent picture. Violence against prostitutes was endemic and almost never punished. Historians argue that this lack of legal protection was not an oversight, it was a deliberate, structural part of a society that viewed these women as existing outside the bounds of its protection. They were, in the eyes of the law, unrapeable. So you learn to live with the constant, low-humming fear. You learn to patch yourself up, to cover the bruises with powder, to explain away a split lip as a clumsy fall. You don't talk about the worst of it, not even to the other girls. There is an unspoken understanding that some horrors are too great to be given voice. To speak of them would be to make them too real, too unbearable. You bury the trauma deep inside, another silent wound you carry in the quiet of your own mind. The screams you cannot let out echo in the silent spaces of your heart. A constant, chilling reminder of the price of survival in a lawless land. The physical pain from the violence and the endless work. The emotional exhaustion from the constant performance. The gnawing shame of the social ostracism, it all combines into a weight that becomes too heavy to carry. Day after day, you need an escape. Not a permanent escape, like running away, which seems impossible, but a temporary one. A brief respite from the relentless pressure of your own consciousness. And in the gilded cage, that escape is readily available. It comes in a small, dark brown bottle with a simple paper label. It's called laudanum. You see the other girls using it first. You see Josie, after a particularly brutal night with a violent client, retreat to her room and emerge an hour later with a placid, detached look on her face, the tear gone from her eyes. You see a girl who is doubled over with menstrual cramps take a small sip from a violin, then go downstairs to work her shift. Her pain miraculously vanished. The bottle is passed around like a secret handshake, a shared sacrament in the Church of Misery. Laudanum was the all-purpose wonder drug of the 19th century. It was a tincture of opium, meaning opium dissolved in alcohol, and it was sold over the counter, legally and cheaply, for a staggering array of ailments: coughing, diarrhea, anxiety, insomnia, teething pain and babies, female complaints. It was the era's equivalent of aspirin, ibuprofen, and anti-anxiety medication, all rolled into one, and it was highly, devastatingly addictive. Your first encounter with it is innocent enough. You have a splitting headache and a racking cough from a cold you can't shake. Torah, in a rare moment of what looks like kindness but is actually just sound business practice, gives you a small dose. This will help you sleep, she says. You're no good to me if you're sick. You take a spoonful of the bitter, potent liquid. It burns a little as it goes down. And then, a slow, warm wave spreads through your body, starting in your stomach and radiating out to your fingertips. The headache recedes. The cough subsides. The ache in your back disappears. But it's more than that. The sharp edges of your anxiety begin to soften. The constant, looping thoughts of debt and fear and shame become muffled, as if they are happening to someone else, far away. For the first time in months, your mind is quiet. You sink into a deep, dreamless sleep. It feels like a miracle. You start using it more regularly. A small dose before your shift to calm your nerves. A larger dose afterwards to blur the sharp, painful memories of the night and allow you to sleep. The laudanum becomes a tool, another part of your survival kit. Like your corset and your painted-on smile, it allows you to function. It allows you to endure. Here's a little-known and tragic fact about laudanum use among prostitutes. It was sometimes used as a tool of coercion by madams and pimps. A madam might intentionally get a new, rebellious girl hooked on laudanum. An addicted woman was a more docile, more compliant, and more desperate worker. Her need for the drug became another chain, stronger and more insidious than any financial debt, binding her to the person who controlled her supply. The historical debate around this topic is quite active. Were the high rates of opiate addiction among 19th century prostitutes a result of self-medication, a desperate attempt to cope with trauma and physical pain, or was it a more systemic problem, actively encouraged by a medical establishment that overprescribed opiates for female hysteria and by a system of exploitation that benefited from having an addicted workforce? The answer is almost certainly a combination of both. These women were in immense physical and psychological pain, and laudanum was a cheap, effective, and socially acceptable way to treat that pain. They were victims of their circumstances, and also victims of the most popular and dangerous medicine of their time. You see the long-term effects on the older girls in the house. You see the vacant, glassy-eyed stares, the slurred speech, the trembling hands in the morning before they've had their first dose. You see their health deteriorate, their skin taking on a pale, waxy pallor. They are ghosts, haunted by a dependency that is slowly consuming them from the inside out. You tell yourself you are different. You are only using it when you need it. You are in control, but the definition of need begins to expand. A stressful night becomes a reason to take a little more. A sad memory becomes a reason. A feeling of boredom becomes a reason. The bottle, which once sat on your washed sand for days, now needs to be refilled every week. The cost dutifully added to your tab by Cora. The warmth and quiet it once provided now comes with a price. The time between doses is filled with a new kind of misery and gnawing restlessness. A clammy sweat, a deep, aching pain in your bones that only another dose can cure. The thing that you took to escape your cage has become the cage itself. You are no longer just trapped in the gilded cage saloon, you are now also trapped in the chemical cage of addiction. A prison with walls made of your own desperate need. And the key is in Cora's hands. The law, in the form of the town marshal, is a sporadic but significant presence in your life. His visits are not about justice or protection, they are about business. The marshal, a man with a drooping mustache and a perpetually bored expression, is just another player in the town's complex economy of vice. And your house is one of his most reliable sources of revenue. About once a month, he performs what is known as the roundup. He and his deputy will make a great show of raiding the saloons and brothels in the sporting district. It's a piece of public theater, designed to reassure the respectable citizens of the town that the law is being upheld and that vice is being kept in check. You'll be in the middle of the evening's chaos when the marshal and his deputy burst through the swinging doors. "All right, this is a raid," he'll bellow, for the benefit of anyone listening. The customers are told to clear out, and you and the other women are lined up. The first time it happens, you are terrified. You imagine being thrown into a dark, filthy jail cell, but Josie leans over and whispers, "Don't worry, it's just a formality. Play along." You are all herded down to the small, one-room building that serves as the marshal's office and jail. There, a bizarre and highly efficient ritual takes place. You are not charged with a specific crime. Instead, you are lined up before the marshal's desk, where he sits with a ledger that looks remarkably similar to Cora's. One by one, Cora, who has followed you down to the office with a calm, business-like demeanor, pays your fines. She pays a set amount for each girl and a larger fine for herself for keeping a disorderly house. The charge is usually something vague like vagrancy or disturbing the peace. You don't speak. You don't have to enter a plea. You are simply a name on a list next to a dollar amount. Cora pays the total sum in cash. The marshal writes "paid" in his ledger. And the whole affair is over in less than 30 minutes. You are then released and expected to walk back to the gilded cage and get right back to work, to earn back the money that Cora just spent on your fines. This system was incredibly common across the American West. It was a de facto licensing system for vice. The town government, often underfunded, relied on the revenue from these fines to pay the marshal's salary, to fund public works, or to simply line their own pockets. The monthly or weekly fines were essentially a sin tax, an unofficial business expense for the madams. Here's a particularly cynical and little-known detail of this system: the medical inspection fine. In some of the more progressive frontier towns, officials implemented mandatory weekly medical inspections for all registered prostitutes, ostensibly to control the spread of venereal disease. A town-appointed doctor would perform the inspections, and the women or their madams would be forced to pay a fee for the service. However, these inspections were often perfunctory and ineffective, and the system often devolved into another form of financial exploitation, a way to extract yet another fee from the most vulnerable members of the community. It was public health as a protection racket. The historical debate around this practice revolves around its function. Was this system of fines and licensing a genuine, if flawed, attempt by frontier communities to regulate and contain vice, or was it a system of pure hypocrisy, a way for a town to publicly condemn prostitution while secretly profiting from its existence? Most historians lean heavily toward the latter interpretation. The fines were not a deterrent, they were an operating cost. The legal system was not there to eradicate the profession, but to make it a taxable and profitable part of the municipal economy. The monthly raid becomes just another part of the grim routine. It's a humiliating and dehumanizing experience. You are publicly paraded down the street, labeled a criminal, only to have your freedom immediately purchased by the woman who owns your debt. The experience reinforces your status as property. You are not a citizen with rights, you are a chattel, an asset whose legal troubles are simply another column in the ledger. You also realize the terrifying extent of Cora's power. She has the law in her pocket. She is not just your employer, she is your warden, your banker, and your legal representative. Your entanglement with her is total. There is no outside authority you can appeal to, because that authority is on her payroll. After one of these raids, as you're walking back to the saloon in the cold night air, you look up at the vast, star-filled sky. For a moment, you feel the immense, crushing smallness of your own life. You are a pawn in a game you never asked to play, moved around a board by forces you cannot control, by Cora, by the customers, by the marshal. The law is not a shield, it's just another part of the cage. The mirror becomes your enemy. In the beginning, your reflection was a source of a strange, disconnected fascination. You saw a character, a painted doll in a certain dress, someone you didn't quite recognize. But, as the months grind on, the mirror begins to tell a story you can no longer ignore. It tells the truth. The first changes are subtle. The dark circles under your eyes, once easily hidden with powder, become deeper, more permanent fixtures. Your skin, which was once clear, loses its vitality. It takes on a dull, pasty quality from the lack of sunlight, poor nutrition, and the constant use of cheap, lead-based cosmetics. Small lines begin to form at the corners of your eyes and mouth, not from laughter, but from a perpetual state of tension and forced smiles. You are aging, but it's not the slow, natural progression of time. It's a rapid, brutal erosion, accelerated by the harsh realities of your life. The combination of alcohol, lack of sleep, chronic stress, and the creeping influence of the laudanum you rely on as a toxic cocktail that is poisoning you from the inside out. You notice it in the other girls, too. You see the freshness fade from the new arrivals with alarming speed. You see the older girls, the ones who have been in the life for years, and they look a decade or two older than their actual age. Their faces are maps of hardship, their eyes hollowed out by things they've seen and endured. They are a terrifying glimpse into your own future. The gilded cage is a business built on the illusion of youth and beauty, and in this business, a woman's face is her primary asset. As that asset begins to visibly depreciate, her value to the madam plummets. Cora is unsentimental about this. She is a businesswoman, and she manages her inventory with a cold, clear eye. You start to notice the small signs of your demotion. You are no longer given the best clients, the wealthy ranchers or the polite businessmen. Those are now steered towards the newer, fresher faces. You are assigned the rougher, less desirable customers. The dress you are given from the house supply is a little more worn, a little less glamorous. You are slowly but surely being moved down the internal hierarchy of the house. From a promising new arrival, you are becoming part of the worn-out, dependable furniture. This process is a source of constant, gnawing anxiety. You spend more time in front of that cloudy mirror, pinching your cheeks to bring color to them, trying to arrange your hair in a way that hides the tired lines. You become obsessed with the small signs of decay, because you know that each one is a step closer to being deemed unprofitable. A strange and sad detail from this world is the obsession with miracle creams and restorative tonics. Hucksters and traveling salesmen did a roaring trade in the sporting districts, selling expensive, useless potions that promised to erase wrinkles, whiten skin, and restore a youthful glow. Women would spend their precious few secret dollars on these products, clinging to the desperate hope that they could buy themselves a little more time, that they could somehow halt the visible toll that their life was taking on them. It was another false hope, sold in a bottle. The historical debate here touches on the concept of the career span of a 19th century prostitute. How long could a woman realistically work in this profession early? Sensationalist accounts often claimed a life expectancy of only 4 or 5 years after entering the life. Modern historians, using more careful analysis of census data and mortality records, suggest that while the profession was incredibly dangerous, the figure might be an exaggeration. However, they agree that the profitable career span was brutally short. A woman might survive for many years, but her ability to work in a high-end establishment like the Gilded Cage was likely limited to a few years at most. After her youth and health faded, she would be forced to descend the ladder, moving to cheaper saloons, then to the grim, low-end cribs on the edge of town, where the work was harder, the pay was less, and the dangers were even greater. You see this happen to one of the older girls, a woman named Maev. She had been a fixture in the house for years, a sharp, witty woman who had managed to hold on longer than most. But her persistent cough has worsened. Her hands have a constant tremor from her reliance on laudanum, and the lines on her face tell a long, hard story. One week, Cora simply stops giving her shifts on the main floor. She is relegated to mending clothes and helping in the kitchen. Her status reduced to that of a house servant. Her room, one of the better ones, is given to a new girl. Maev is moved to a small, forgotten storage room in the back. The demotion is total and humiliating. A few weeks later, she is gone. No one knows where. Maybe she moved on to a cheaper house in another town. Maybe she ended up on the line. Maybe she just disappeared. You look in the mirror again. The face that stares back at you is a stranger's. A pale, tired woman with your eyes. The fear you feel is cold and sharp. You are not just afraid of the violence of the dead. You are afraid of becoming invisible, of being used up and discarded. You are afraid of time itself, which has become your greatest enemy, relentlessly pulling you toward the day when you are no longer of any value, and you, too, will simply disappear. The laudanum, your secret, competent, trusted friend, has turned on you. The gentle, warm wave that once carried you away from your troubles has become a treacherous, grasping undertow, and it is pulling you down. The little bottle is no longer a choice, it's a necessity. The day doesn't begin until you've had your first dose. Without it, a horrifying physical and mental reality sets in. Your hands tremble so badly you can't hold a glass. A cold sweat breaks out all over your body, yet you shiver with a deep, internal chill. Every muscle and joint screams with a dull, excruciating ache. Nausea churns in your stomach, and your mind is a chaotic storm of anxiety and paranoia. This is the sickness, the withdrawal, and it is a torment beyond anything you could have imagined. The only thing that silences the screaming of your own body is another dose. The relief is instantaneous, but it's no longer euphoric. It doesn't bring peace or quiet anymore. It just brings you back to a state of fragile, shaky normalcy. It makes you functional. You are no longer taking it to feel good, you are taking it to stop feeling unimaginably bad. Your life is now measured in the hours between doses. You are constantly aware of the level of liquid in your bottle, a silent, ticking clock counting down to the next wave of sickness. Your world, which was already small, shrinks even further. It is now confined to the physical space of the saloon and the chemical space of your addiction. Cora knows, of course. She knows. She controls the supply. The laudanum, which she may have initially offered as a kindness, has become her most powerful tool of control. Your financial debt on her ledger is an abstract concept, a set of numbers on a page, but the debt your body owes to the opium is real, visceral, and absolute. She doesn't need to lock your door at night. Your addiction is a stronger chain than any lock and key. You are not alone in this. You look around at the other women, and you see the signs you now know so well. You see the slight tremor in Josie's hand as she pours a drink. You see the pinpoint pupils and vacant stare of another girl who has taken too much. You see the desperate, pleading look in their eyes when they ask Cora for an advance to buy another bottle. You are a sorority of ghosts, haunting the halls of the Gilded Cage, held together by a shared and secret suffering. A little-known and heartbreaking aspect of this was the so-called opium layout. In some brothels and the more destitute cribs, a woman who was too sick or too far gone in her addiction to work in the traditional sense might be rented out in an opium den. Clients would pay to lie beside her and share an opium pipe, seeking a kind of passive, drowsy companionship. It was the final stage of commodification. where a woman's value was reduced to her mere presence in a drug-induced stupor. It was the bottom of the ladder, a slow, living death. The historical debate on this subject often revolves around the question of societal awareness. Did people in the 19th century understand the addictive nature of opium? The answer is complex. While the term addiction as we know it was not yet fully formed, there was a growing awareness in the medical community and the public of the dangers of habitual opiate use. There were numerous articles in medical journals and popular magazines describing the plight of opium eaters and laudanum slaves. However, this awareness was often tinged with a strong moral judgment. Addiction was seen not as a disease, but as a sign of a weak will, a moral failing, for a woman who was already considered morally bankrupt by society. Her addiction was simply seen as further proof of her depravity, not a condition deserving of sympathy or treatment. Your performance in the saloon suffers. Your mind is foggy. Your reactions are slow. You sometimes forget a customer's name moments after he's told you. Your laughter sounds hollow, even to your own ears. Your movements are either sluggish and heavy or jittery and anxious. Cora's gaze on you becomes colder, more critical. Your earnings drop, and your debt on the ledger, inflated by the weekly cost of your laudanum, begins to spiral completely out of control. You are caught in a perfect, closed loop of despair. The misery of your life drives you to the drug. The drug deepens your misery and your debt. The deepening misery and debt drive you to need more of the drug. It is a whirlpool, and it is pulling you under. One night, after a particularly bad shift where you dropped a tray of drinks and earned a tirade of abuse from Cora, you retreat to your room. You look at your reflection in the cloudy mirror. The face that stares back is gaunt and pale, the eyes wide and haunted. You don't recognize this person at all. This is not the girl who stepped off the train full of desperate hope. This is someone else. This is a ghost. You pick up the little brown bottle. It's almost empty. And a new kind of fear, colder and more profound than any you have felt before, grips you. The fear is not of what will happen when you take the last dose, but of what will happen when there is no more to take. Every so often, a tiny, dangerous sliver of light pierces the gloom of your existence. It comes in the form of a man, not the usual sort, not the rough miner, the drunken cowboy, or the cold-eyed drifter. This man is different. He is gentle. He is kind. And he makes you a promise. He might be a young homesteader, new to the area, who looks at you not with lust or contempt, but with a startling, heartbreaking pity. He might be a lonely, widowed rancher who sees in you a ghost of the wife he lost. He comes to the saloon not for the whiskey or the cards, but for you. He requests you specifically. Night after night, he doesn't want to go upstairs. He just wants to sit with you, to hold your hand, to talk. He tells you that you are too good for this life. He says he sees the sadness in your eyes, the real person behind the painted smile. He talks about his farm, his land, the quiet life he is building. And then, one night, in a hushed, earnest whisper, he makes the offer. Come away with me. Let me take you out of here. Be my wife. Marriage. The word hangs in the air, shimmering with an almost unbearable hope. It is the ultimate fantasy. The Cinderella story that is whispered about among the girls like a sacred myth. To be rescued, to be made respectable, to be given a new name and a new life. It's the only socially acceptable escape route that exists. You are torn. A part of you, the cynical, hardened part that has been forged in the fires of the gilded cage, screams that it's a lie. You've seen men make promises before. You've seen them whisper sweet nothings to a girl one night and pretend not to know her on the street the next day. You know that men's promises, like their whiskey, are cheap and fleeting. But another part of you, the part that still remembers how to dream, wants desperately to believe him. You look into his earnest eyes, and you allow yourself to imagine it. A small house on the prairie. The smell of baking bread instead of stale smoke. Waking up to sunlight instead of the dull ache of a hangover. a life of simple, quiet dignity. The hope is so potent, so seductive, it's almost painful. This scenario, the prostitute who marries a client, is one of the most enduring tropes of the Old West mythos. It's a cornerstone of countless novels and films. But what is the historical reality? Historians who have painstakingly combed through marriage records, census data, and town directories have a complicated answer. The historical debate centers on how often this actually happened. The consensus is that it was exceptionally rare. For every one woman who successfully married out of the life, there were thousands who did not. The social stigma was usually too great for a respectable man to overcome. Marrying a soiled off would mean facing the scorn of his community, the ostracism of the church, and the judgment of his family. However, it did happen. The frontier, with its skewed gender ratios and looser social structures, sometimes allowed for possibilities that would have been unthinkable back east. A lonely, isolated man might be more willing to overlook a woman's past in exchange for companionship. But even in these rare cases, the happily ever after was far from guaranteed. The woman's past would always be a shadow hanging over the marriage, a source of shame and a potential weapon for gossip mongers. A fascinating and little-known aspect of these rescue fantasies was the role of the madam. A smart Madame Nightcore knew that the myth of being rescued was a valuable tool for keeping her girls docile. It gave them a reason to keep working, to keep hoping. But if that myth threatened to become a reality, she would act swiftly to crush it. A girl who left to get married was a loss of a valuable, income-generating asset, and more importantly, she was a loss of the debt she owed. Cora would not let her property simply walk away. You decide to take the risk. You agree to his proposal. You make a plan to meet him at the edge of town at dawn. For one night, you are filled with a dizzying, terrifying joy. You are finally getting out. But your happiness makes you careless. Cora notices the light in your eyes, the genuine smile on your face. She is a connoisseur of false emotion, and she recognizes the real thing instantly. She pulls you aside, and her questions are sharp and probing. You try to lie, but you are not a skilled enough actress to fool her. The fury in her eyes is cold and terrifying, but she does not yell. She does not threaten you with violence. She does a thing that is far crueler. She smiles a thin, pitying smile. "You poor, foolish girl," she says. "You don't really believe him, do you?" She then proceeds to dismantle your hope, piece by brutal piece. She tells you about the other girls who believed the same promises. She tells you how the men never showed up. She paints a vivid, cruel picture of your future as his wife, the way the other women in town will shun you, the way they will whisper behind your back, the way your past will always be a source of shame for him and his children. "Here," she says, her voice a venomous whisper, "you are at least someone. Out there, with him, you will be nothing but his whore, and he will never let you forget it." Then she delivers the final blow. She opens her ledger, and even if he does want to, she says, tapping a long finger on the final, staggering number at the bottom of the page, "You are not free to go. You have a debt to this house. Are you going to ask your fiancé to pay it? Do you think his love will survive that?" The hope drains out of you, leaving you empty and cold. She is right. The cage is not just the saloon, the addiction, the violence. It is the ledger. It is your past. There is no escape. The kind rancher, your promised savior, is just another dream that has turned to dust in the harsh light of day. The collapse of your marriage fantasy leaves you in a darker place than ever before. The brief, intoxicating taste of hope has made the reality of your confinement even more bitter. The walls of the gilded cage feel tighter. The air thicker. The future a long, featureless hallway with no doors. The idea of escape, once a vague, distant dream, now becomes a frantic, obsessive thought. If you cannot be rescued, then you must rescue yourself. You must run. The plan forms in your mind in the dead of night, a desperate blueprint drawn in the darkness of your windowless room. The logistics are terrifyingly simple and impossibly complex. You need to leave. But how and to where? First, you need money. The little you earn is immediately swallowed by your debt to Cora and your need for laudanum. You have to find a way to skim, to hide a little something for yourself. This is a dangerous game. Cora, you know, has an uncanny ability to know exactly how much a client has spent. But you become cunning. You learn to shortchange a particularly drunk customer, pocketing a few coins. You might convince a client to give you a private tip, a small nugget of gold dust pressed into your palm, which you then have to find a place to hide. Your room is not safe. Cora is known to search the girls' rooms when they are working. So you find a hiding place, a loose floorboard, a small tear in the mattress lining, a hollowed-out bedpost. Your secret stash grows agonizingly slowly, coin by coin. A tiny hoard of hope. This practice, known among the women as stashing or building a getaway poke, was a silent act of rebellion. One of the few ways a woman could exert some control over her own finances. While you save, you gather information. You listen to the conversations of travelers in the saloon. You learn the train schedules, the names of the next towns down the line, the routes the Stegecuos take. Every piece of information is a thread in the flimsy rope you are weaving. But the question remains, where would you go? You can't back east. The shame would be too great, and you have no one to return to. You could go to a larger city, like San Francisco or Denver. But what would you do there? You have no skills other than the ones you've learned here. Your reputation, your past, would follow you. Starting fresh seems like a fantasy. This was the central dilemma for any woman contemplating escape. Historians have debated this point extensively. While the frontier offered a degree of anonymity, it was also a network of small, interconnected communities. A woman's reputation could travel faster than a stagecoach. Some argue that the most successful escapes were not to other towns, where a woman's past could be discovered, but into total obscurity, marrying an isolated homesteader, for instance, and disappearing into the vastness of the prairie. Others suggest that the only real escape was a complete change of identity, a risky and difficult proposition in an era with no formal identification papers, but a strong reliance on word of mouth and personal reputation. The biggest obstacle is your addiction. You know, with a chilling certainty, that you cannot survive without laudanum. The sickness is a physical chain that binds you to this place, to Cora's supply. Your escape plan has to include a way to procure more. You manage to save a little of your dose each day, slowly building up a small, precious supply in a hidden vial. It's not much, but you hope it will be enough to get you through the first few days, to get you to the next town where you can buy more. The fear is constant, the fear of being caught. If Cora discovered your stash of money or your secret vial of laudanum, the punishment would be swift and severe. You've heard stories of girls who tried to run. They were caught, dragged back, beaten, and had their debts doubled as a finder's fee. They were then made an example of, a warning to the other girls of the futility of hope. You pick your night, a night when a big cattle drive has just come into town, ensuring the saloon will be at its most chaotic and Cora will be at her most distracted. Your heart pounds are frantic, suffocating rhythm in your chest all day. Every glance from Cora feels like an accusation. Every casual question sounds like an interrogation. When the time comes, you move like a ghost. You slip out of the saloon during the peak of the evening's noise. You don't take your bag, it would be too suspicious. You have nothing but the clothes on your back in the small, precious pouch containing your coins and your laudanum, hidden deep in your dress. You slip out the back door, past the stinking privy and the kitchen refuse. The night air is cold and sharp. You don't look back. You melt into the shadows of the alleyways, your footsteps silent in the dust. You are running. The town is a maze of dark alleys and looming, unfamiliar shapes. The sounds of the saloons, the tinny pianos, the drunken shouts fade behind you. You reach the edge of town, the last wooden building giving way to the vast, silent darkness of the open country. The moon is a pale sliver in the sky. You stand there, your heart a wild bird in your chest, breathing in the clean, cold air of freedom. But as you look out into the immense, empty darkness, a new kind of fear descends. It's the fear of the unknown. Behind you is a cage you know, a brutal but familiar world. Ahead of you is nothing, a vast, terrifying emptiness. You are completely, utterly alone. Your escape is not an arrival, it is simply a departure into a new and more profound kind of uncertainty. The initial euphoria of your escape quickly dissolves into the cold, hard reality of your situation. The immense, silent landscape that seemed to promise freedom now feels threatening, its emptiness a mirror of your own. You are a lone woman, on foot, in the middle of the night, with a handful of coins and a rapidly dwindling supply of laudanum. You walk for what feels like hours, following the faint outline of the wagon trail away from the town. Your cheap saloon shoes pinching your feet, the thin fabric of your dress offering little protection against the growing chill. Every sound the cry of a distant coyote, the rustle of a creature in the tall grass sends a jolt of terror through you. You are prey here, vulnerable in a way you never were, even in the most dangerous moments in the saloon. As dawn breaks, painting the eastern sky in shades of grey and pink, your exhaustion is absolute. You find a small, sheltered spot behind a cluster of rocks and collapse, pulling your thin shawl around you. You take a small, carefully measured sip of your precious laudanum, just enough to quell the first tremors of the sickness and to dull the sharp edges of your fear. Your plan, which seemed so clear in the dark of your room, now seems laughably naive. What were you thinking, that you could just walk to the next town, that you could simply start over? The sheer, brutal scale of the West is something you couldn't comprehend from inside the saloon. You wait until the sun is high in the sky before you dare to move again. You are tormented by thirst. Eventually, you see a wagon approaching in the distance. Your first instinct is to hide, but you know you cannot survive out here alone. As the wagon gets closer, you see it's a simple farmer and his wife, their faces weathered and kind. You step out onto the road, a damsel in distress, and tell them a story you've concocted, that you were a passenger on a stagecoach that was held up by bandits, and you fled into the hills in the confusion. They believe you, or at least, they are kind enough to pretend to. They give you water from their canteen, the most delicious thing you have ever tasted, and offer you a ride to the next town. As you sit in the back of their rattling wagon, you are overwhelmed by their simple, unquestioning decency. It is a kindness so foreign to your recent experience that it almost makes you weep. But when you arrive in the next town, a place that is a near identical copy of the one you just fled, your status is immediately clear. You are a single woman, alone, with no luggage and address that, while you thought it plain, is clearly identifiable to the locals as the type worn in a saloon. The looks you get are not of sympathy, but of suspicion and contempt. You find a room in the cheapest boarding house, paying for one night with your precious coins. The loneliness is crushing. You have no one to talk to, nowhere to go. You are a complete outcast. Your tiny supply of laudanum is almost gone. The familiar, terrifying symptoms of withdrawal are beginning to return with a vengeance. You realize the terrible truth of your situation. You have escaped the gilded cage, but you have not escaped the life. The only skill you have that can earn you money is the one you learn it there. You are a branded woman, and the brand is invisible but indelible. This is the grim reality that so many historical accounts overlook. The escape was often just a horizontal move, a relocation from one brothel to another, often a less desirable one. The dream of starting a new life was, for most, a tragic illusion. Faced with this desperate reality, some women made a different choice, a final, irreversible escape. Suicide rates among prostitutes in the 19th century West were shockingly high. The methods were grimly practical and readily available. The most common was an intentional overdose of laudanum. The same substance they used to numb the pain of living became their means of ending it. The bottle that offered a temporary escape from their cage became the key to a permanent one. This final, desperate act is a subject of much debate among historians. Was it, as contemporary moralists claimed, the final, pathetic act of a depraved soul, a sinner's end, or was it, as more modern scholars argue, a rational choice made by women who had weighed their options and found them all to be unlivable for these women? Suicide may not have been an act of despair, but an act of agency, the last and only decision they could make for themselves. A way to reclaim control over a life that's been so brutally controlled by others. You sit on the edge of the lumpy bed in your new, anonymous room. Your laudanum is almost gone. Your money is running out. The sickness is coming. The future is a terrifying, tranquil. You think of the girls back at the cage. You think of Sarah, and Maeve, and Josie. You think of the cold, final peace that an overdose of laudanum would bring. The choice is stark. Do you walk down the street to the new town saloon, offer yourself to a new madam, and start the cycle all over again, or do you choose the other path, the path of final escape? You look at the last few drops of dark liquid in your vial. For the first time, you understand the allure of that choice. It is not a surrender. It is a final, silent scream of defiance, a way to finally be free. You don't choose the finality of the laudanum bottle, not yet, a stubborn, flickering ember of your old self. The girl who stepped off the train with a heart full of desperate hope refuses to be extinguished. You choose to survive, even if it means stepping back into a different version of the same cage. You sell the last of your valuable possessions, a small locket from your mother that you had managed to keep hidden. It earns you just enough money for a few more days and, more importantly, a new bottle of laudanum from the local apothecary. The purchase both saves you and condemns you, a fresh link in the chain of your addiction. You find the town's main saloon. It's called the Silver Dollar, and it's smaller, dirtier, and more violent than the gilded cage. The madam is a hard-faced woman with a scar above her eyebrow. She looks you up and down, her eyes missing nothing, not the desperation, not the slight tremor in your hands, not the faint tracks of hardship on your face. She knows exactly what you are and where you've come from. She doesn't need to ask. She hires you on the spot. There are no illusions this time, no talk of being a hostess. The terms are blunt and brutal. The work is harder. The clients are rougher, and the pay is less. You are assigned a crib that makes your old room at the gilded cage look like a palace. It's a store in a long, dark hallway that smells of damp and decay. And so the cycle begins again, but on a lower, more degrading rung of the ladder. You are no longer a new girl. You are used gods, a drifter. The other women here are harder, more cynical. The brief moments of camaraderie you shared with Josie are gone, replaced by a sullen, suspicious silence. Everyone is on her own, a solitary survivor in a sea of misery. As the years pass, you drift from one dusty town to another. You work in saloons, in dance halls, in the creme, desperate cribs on the line. Each move is a step down. Your name changes, but your life remains the same. You are trapped in a downward spiral, a slow, relentless descent. Your health deteriorates. The laudanum, now a constant companion, ravages your body. You have a persistent, hacking cough that never leaves. Your hands are never still. Your memory becomes foggy. The past a blur of smoky rooms and strange men's faces. You eventually end up in a place like Tombstone or Deadwood, a town famous for its voice, and it is here that you will likely meet your end, not in a dramatic gunfight, but in the quiet, anonymous way that most women in your position did. Perhaps you finally succumb to a minor's consumption or lung fever, tuberculosis or pneumonia, your body too weak to fight it off any longer. Perhaps you contract syphilis, and it begins its slow, cruel march through your body, ending in madness and decay. Perhaps the violence you've managed to survive for so long finally catches up to you. A drunken client in a dark alley, or perhaps one day, the despair simply becomes too much, and you take that final, fatal overdose of laudanum you've contemplated so many times before. You will be buried in the town's cemetery, on a barren patch of ground often called Boot Hill. Your grave will be simple, marked by a plain wooden board, if it's marked at all. The name on the marker, if there is one, will be the one you were using at the time. A name that wasn't your own, just another soiled dove, the undertaker will mutter, as he has for so many before you. This leads to a little-known and poignant piece of history: the archaeological findings in these cemeteries. When archaeologists have excavated the disreputable sections of frontier cemeteries, they consistently find the graves of young women, typically between the ages of 17 and 35. Their skeletons often show signs of poor nutrition, untreated injuries, and the ravages of diseases like syphilis. They are the silent, physical proof of the brutal reality of this life. These unnamed graves are the final, stark counter-narrative to the romantic myths. The historical debate here is a somber one, focusing on memory. Why were the lives of these women so thoroughly erased from the popular story of the West? Some argue it was a deliberate act of historical cleansing by the respectable society that came later, who wanted to create a more heroic, family-friendly foundation myth for their towns. Others argue that it wasn't a conspiracy, but simply a reflection of the fact that these women left so few records. They were often illiterate, transient, and lived under assumed names. They left behind no letters, no diaries, no property. They simply vanished, their stories untold. Your real name will be forgotten. The family you left behind back east will never know what became of you. They will simply remember you as the girl who went west and was never heard from again. You will become a ghost, a silent, unremembered casualty of the great, glorious expansion of the nation. Your life, with all its pain, its brief moments of friendship, its desperate hopes and fears, will be reduced to a single, unmarked patch of dirt on a lonely hill. The world will move on, and the silence that follows will be absolute. Now, let's step back. Let's leave your lonely grave on that dusty hill and travel forward in time, away from the grit and the pain and the silence. Let's see what becomes of your story, of the memory of you and the thousands of women like you. Decades pass. The frontier closes. The wild, chaotic towns you knew are tame. The mud streets are paved. The wooden shacks are replaced by brick buildings, and the saloons are shut down by temperance unions on civic committees. The respectable people have won. They are busy building a new, sanitized history for themselves, a foundation myth for their now civilized communities. In this new history, there is no place for you. Your reality is too messy, too painful, too contradictory to the heroic narrative they are constructing. The story of the West becomes a story of brave pioneers, noble cowboys, and visionary builders. The exploitation, the violence, the desperation that were the true bedrock of so many of these towns are deliberately forgotten, buried like the unmarked graves on Boot Hill. Then, something strange happens. Your story begins to re-emerge, but in a new, twisted, and unrecognizable form. It appears in the dime novels of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. In these sensationalist, cheaply printed books, you are reborn. You are no longer a desperate, exploited woman trapped in a cycle of debt and addiction. You become a character, a Trip the hooker with a heart of gold. In these stories, you are sassy, independent, and quick-witted. You wear beautiful gowns with no mention of the debt they represent. You are the trusted confidant of the heroic marshal, the one person who knows his secrets. You are fiercely loyal and secretly virtuous. You often fall in love with the hero and, in the final chapter, you sacrifice yourself to save him. A noble death that redeems your fallen nature. You become a romantic fantasy, a safe, sanitized version of a dangerous reality. This myth is then picked up and amplified by the biggest myth-making machine of the 20th century, Hollywood. On the silver screen, you are played by glamorous movie stars. The gilded cage is transformed into a brightly lit, cheerful place full of laughter and exciting musical numbers. Your work consists of singing a song on a stage, performing a can-can, and engaging in witty banter with the handsome cowboy hero, the debt, the disease, the violence, the addiction, the back alley abortions, the social exile. All of it is erased. The soiled dove is laundered, bleached of all her pain, and presented as a charming, slightly naughty, but ultimately good-hearted heroine. She is the quintessential bad girl who can be saved by the love of a good man. A narrative that is both romantic and deeply reassuring to the audience. It allows them to consume the titillating idea of your profession without having to confront any of its horrifying realities. Here's a little-known fact that shows how pervasive this romanticism became the tourism industry in all frontier towns. Places like Tombstone and Deadwood began to rebuild their sporting districts as tourist attractions. They offered ghost tours and staged reenactments, often featuring actresses playing the role of the sassy, golden-hearted saloon girl. Your life, a story of profound suffering, has been transformed into a form of entertainment, a quaint and charming piece of heritage. The final historical debate, and perhaps the most important one, is about the legacy of this myth. Why has the romantic lie of the hooker with a heart of gold proven so much more durable than the grim reality? Some historians argue that the myth serves a deep cultural need to believe in redemption and to soften the harsh edges of the past. It's a more comfortable, more entertaining story. Others offer a more critical perspective, arguing that this romanticism is a form of historical gaslighting. It silences the voices of the actual victims and replaces their stories of trauma and exploitation with a male-centric fantasy. It makes it impossible to understand the true nature of the frontier and the real price that women like you paid for its creation. So as you lie there in your forgotten grave, the world above spins on, telling a story that is not your own. They remember a myth, a caricature, a ghost in a satin dress singing on a stage. They do not remember the girl in the textile mill who read a poster. They do not remember the terror of the ledger, the fear of disease, the agony of the back room. They do not remember your name. The greatest violence done to you was not the abuse you endured in life, but the erasure of your truth after death. You have been replaced by a more convenient, more profitable, and more romantic lie. And that lie, that gilded myth, is the final, unbreachable wall of your cage. And so, our journey through the shadows of the West comes to a close. The story fades, like the last notes of a tinny piano in an empty saloon. The harsh sunlight of history gives way to a softer, quieter darkness. The dust settles, not just on the paved streets of a long-gone town, but on your thoughts as well. Allow the weight of this story to become light, like a feather drifting down in the quiet air. The voices from the past grow faint, whispering their goodbyes as they recede into the gentle quiet of the night. You can let them go now. Let the noise of their world dissolve, leaving only the soft hum of your own room, the steady rhythm of your own breathing. You are safe now, far from that time and that place. The journey is over. It is time to rest, to let the current of sleep pull you gently away from the shore of wakefulness. Let your mind drift on that peaceful, silent river, towards the deep and quiet landscapes of your own dreams. The end of the article. Good night.